Good evening all and welcome. Happy Halloween to each and every one of you. The best day of the year. And by gosh, do we have some stories set up for you. Tonight, as is tradition, we have 100 new, hopefully never before heard ghost stories for your listening pleasure. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I lived in a pretty spooky New York City apartment for 3 years. The place was on 29th and 3rd, on the first floor, in the back of a very old building. All the windows looked out onto a narrow brick alley, so naturally the place was very dark all the time. When my roommate and I first moved in, we smelled something awful coming from the apartment next door. It was akin to rotting garbage and cooked cabbage. I figured perhaps it was actually garbage, because we all get lazy from time to time and don't want to put the pants on to take out the trash. After a few weeks though, I told the super about it, who knocks on the guy's door to no avail. A few days later I came home from class, and there was a cleaning crew clearing the place out. Pretty sure what I was smelling all the time was dead guy funk. And then the weird things began to happen. My roommate Audrey swore she heard something move around in her closet on more than one occasion. New York City apartments are notoriously small, and this place was no exception. The closets in the place were tiny, scarcely large enough for a person to stand in, and wedged into a corner of the room like an architectural afterthought. I chalked it up to mice or something. Those little pesky things had been eating my mac and cheese for months. Until she said she actually saw movement in there like a shadow. Something dark. Nothing else happened for a while, until one night when Audrey was home alone taking her makeup off. It was always a long, nightly ritual for her. She was standing in front of the mirror when something walked straight past the open door. There's no logical place that someone could have disappeared to. Oftentimes I would stay up late, painting in my room, because I would always save my assignments for the last minute. Perhaps it was sleep deprivation or delirium, but I swore I saw a figure standing in my doorway in the early morning hours. As soon as I turned my head, heart racing, I'd see nothing. But here's the worst part. It was just a few months until we were about to move out. I was in my room working, a good 20 feet across from the bathroom with my door opened, while Audrey was doing her makeup thing. All of a sudden she yells at me, telling me to get off. I lean back in my chair to look at her across the living room, and she realizes I'm too far away to have touched her. Something had grabbed her shoulder from behind and pulled her around, something she didn't see in the mirror. She was shoveled quickly, but not necessarily violently, by a hand that wasn't there. That place still gives me the creeps. My whole family is convinced that our cottage is haunted. About 11 years ago, my uncle's wife and her friends were up there on their own, 3 or 4 of them. They were sitting out on the deck right by the back door at 1 a.m., just chatting, when one of them says that they can see something on the rocks by the lake. So they all turn and all saw the same thing. It looked like a little boy climbing around on the rocks, playing, and then all of a sudden he vanished. They were freaked out, to say the least. Well, a few days after that, they were talking to my grandma and grandpa about it, who are the owners of the cottage, and my grandma brought up that she had had a very scary paranormal experience in one of the rooms. She was sleeping and was woken up by something pressing down on her chest really hard. She saw the little boy sitting on her chest and tried to yell for help, but she couldn't, so she just closed her eyes and prayed for it to go away. When she woke up, she thought she had just had the worst nightmare of her life, until she saw that she had 2 bruises on her chest right where the pressure was. She did not bring this up until a couple of years ago because she didn't want to scare anyone from coming up. She did some investigation on her own and found out that the people who owned the cottage before us had a son who drowned in the lake. My story took place in the year 2000 and 2001. My brother and I were teens at this time, and we moved into this tiny 2-bedroom duplex house with our mum after our parents got a divorce. The new place had a weird feel to it, and we started to notice our cat acting really weird when only one of us were alone in the house. Our cat Muffin normally could care less where you were or what you were doing. But in this house, if you were alone, he started to stand guard and follow you around. He would stand at attention at the bathroom doorway, looking out while any of us were in there. We thought it was cute, but a little odd, because the duplex only had 2 bedrooms. My mum let me have the master room, and we shared the bathroom, while my brother had the 2nd bedroom and used the hall bathroom. My mum turned the living room into her own room and put up curtains for some privacy. We made it work. Over time, strange things started to happen. I had trouble sleeping and always felt like I was being watched. You would hear strange knocks out of nowhere, but most of the time we chalked it up to maybe the neighbors being loud. There would be times I could swear I saw someone out of the corner of my eye, but nothing would be there when we looked. I would always wake up cold and find my blankets weren't on me. One day my mum finally asked me why I kept throwing my blankets off me, as if maybe I was too hot. I told her no, and I wasn't sure why they were off me. She would come into the room and find my blankets across the room and be fast asleep in a very strange position on the bed that people wouldn't normally sleep in. She expressed her worry and it started to freak me out because I didn't even know what was going on. It got to the point I was too afraid to sleep in my room. My brother, being the oldest, would always complain he wanted the bigger room. Well, one day I had a bad dream. I was being pinned down by something dark and it wouldn't let go. I tried to fight it off, but I couldn't get its hold over my body. When I finally awoke from the dream, I saw above me this dark mass, and it just went poof and was gone. I told my mum about it, and she said I was just dreaming, and that I was probably still in a groggy dream state after waking. That day, after I was tired at school, like I hadn't slept a wink, my brother had to play practice after school, so I came up with a plan. I rushed home, and even though I was alone, I had a mission. I took everything out the master bedroom and switched rooms with my brother. There was no way in hell that I was going to be sleeping there another night. My brother came home and was a little confused on how I did this in only a few hours, but he took it as a win to get the bigger room. His excitement was short-lived, and so was mine. My nightly restless sleep kept happening, the blankets being thrown off me, and the dark thing was now in my closet at night. I had enough, and ended up sleeping with my mom every night. My brother, who isn't a believer in anything paranormal, started having strange experiences. Someone touching him when no one was in the room. The feeling of being watched. Hearing his name being called and being unable to sleep. It ended up becoming a normal thing for us. One day my brother got very sick, and he couldn't sleep in the master bedroom. He said it felt stuffy in the room and he couldn't breathe. So he ended up sleeping on the sofa in the TV room that was just off from the kitchen. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and my mom woke up to my brother wanting to come sleep with us. I made room and he crawled into bed. We found out that in the middle of the night he felt like he was being poked, and when he opened his eyes he saw people standing all around him with their face close to his and looking scary. It scared him so bad he ended up sleeping with us in my mum's bed for a week. My brother tried to rationalize what he saw, and still thinks it was from being sick that caused him to have a hallucination. The day finally came that we were moving out. A spiritual friend of my mum's told her we did have a ghost in our house, and to keep it from following us, we needed to move things out, clean a room, close the door, and not re-enter it. We followed what she said, and started at the far end of the house, moving, cleaning, and making sure nothing was left in a room, and moving on to the next. My brother was taking the last load of stuff to our new place. My mum and I were stuck at the duplex because my brother had our car keys, and his keys were with him, so we couldn't take his car. So we waited in the garage and started to hear footsteps coming from within the house. My mum said, "Do you hear that?" "Yeah," I said. Then the doorknob that was connected to the garage and laundry room began to rattle. We both looked at each other and ran outside and shut the garage door. We stood there looking at the now closed garage door. My mum whispered, "Did you see that?" in a very scared voice. She said to move your brother's car and to wait there for him to get back. Once in the car, we both looked back at the duplex and saw the blinds to the kitchen open a little. I was scared and grabbed my mum's hand. Then the front door started to rattle and shake, and the doorknob was moving like someone was trying to open the door. Just as this was happening, my brother drove up the driveway, and we both screamed for him to get out of the car so that we could get in and take his. He looked utterly confused, and my mum said to get into his car and just go, drive. Once on the road, my mum and I were both breathing heavily, being scared of what just happened, and we talked over what we'd witnessed. If my mum hadn't been there with me, I don't know if I could really believe what occurred. We tried to explain it to my brother, but he didn't want to believe us. When my mum was about 3 years old, my grandma and grandpa moved into an apartment on the 9th floor in downstairs Columbus. After they moved in, she didn't have many friends, and so she developed an imaginary friend named Kathy. Over the course of a year, her relationship with Kathy was getting out of hand. She didn't want to play with anything or anyone else. My grandpa and grandma took her to counseling and to see a psychologist, but they just said it was normal childhood behavior. She started blaming Kathy for things that got broken and messes that were made, and my grandpa had had enough. My grandpa went to get a dog to occupy her time with instead of her imaginary friend. So he goes out and gets a German Shepherd pup from the pound and brings it home. When he gets back, my mother is playing in the corner by a window with Kathy. As soon as he walks in, the dog stares straight at my mum and starts barking and snarling. All of the hair on his back is raised and he's ready to attack, and my mum starts screaming, and all of a sudden the dog stops and my mum just starts crying. My grandparents have freaked out at this point and asked my mum what happened, and she just says that Kathy fell out the window. After that, she never played with Kathy or mentioned her again. Cut to a few months later, they're moving out of the apartment because of my grandma, super religious, can't handle what happened. My grandpa talks to the landlord and somehow the story comes up about Kathy. The landlord is shocked and tells them that the tenants before them moved out after their 5-year-old daughter Kathy fell out of the window and died. I'm sure many won't believe this story. Even my super religious grandma swears by it to this very day. I was serving in the military and was stationed at Camp Carroll, South Korea. This is right in the shadow of Hill 303. The hill was the site of a burial massacre during the Korean War. Now, I was always a skeptic, never believed in anything paranormal, but all that changed on the night of March 12, 2010. After having been released from duty for the day, me and several guys in the unit decided to go out and have an adventure. We'd all heard the stories of Hill 303 and knew the old emplacements were still in some locations. We also heard there was a mass grave on the hill and decided to go exploring and to work our way up to the monument on the top. The trip up was rather uneventful. A few locals racing down the pathway back towards town was the most exciting thing. As we reached the top, we saw the sun was almost set. We decided to hurry back down as some points were rather steep and would be dangerous to traverse at night. About halfway down, the group of us took a break, knowing the path down was no longer dangerous from that point. However, that's when we heard a new sound around us, the sound of running and shouting. It was faint, but we could hear it. I started to try and rationalize, explain it away. Sounds of town, things like that. But things got louder as we went down, so I had assumed I was right. That's until we reached the old emplacements. It sounded as if people were shouting right next to me. At this point, all rational thought had long since fled, and I started to freak out a little. The guys with me started moving at a much faster pace, and I started to move to catch up with them. I felt as if someone had grabbed my ankle. I started running down the hill as fast as I could. I only went on the hill during the day after that, and always before sunset. This was around 2012, in a hotel in Canary Wharf in London. My girlfriend and I had spent the previous day shopping and retired to our bed together and fell asleep. Sometime in the morning, in the low light of the room, I awoke. Through half-open sleepy eyes without my glasses, I see the impression of a girl. She was on my side of the bed near my feet. They look as though they were rummaged through bags. My girlfriend looks through her new purchases, I assume. Then I realized my girlfriend was still asleep next to me. I swore out loud and my heart raced. The figure was some sort of grey translucent girl with long straight hair, and she stood up, calmly took a step or two away from me towards the foot of the bed, and faded away. I didn't sleep well at all that night. Growing up, I played piano for 12 years. I played all styles of music, but by far my favorite was Beethoven, specifically Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. If you don't know it by name, look it up. Everyone's heard it before. I loved playing this song when I was in high school. I think it spoke to my angsty teenage self. Well, one day I was home alone and playing this song, completely wrapped up in it, letting the music just flow out, as only an angsty teen can do. And from behind me I felt someone gently put a hand on my right shoulder. I immediately stopped playing and turned around. Of course, there was no one there and I was completely alone. The same occurrence happened 2 other times while playing the same song and being alone. My sister and I always joked that there was a ghost of an old lady, the former owner, who would walk up and down the stairs, as we'd hear the staircase creak all the time. Guess the old lady really liked that tune. I used to live in a trailer park, off a notorious road known for haunting encounters. It even has its own website dedicating to letting the people tell the stories of their own experiences. But this was before I even knew this website existed. This was not long after I had my 4th child. She was a handful. Besides constantly taking her diaper off, she was a little ninja escape artist that always climbed out of the crib doing flips and the like. Since she's known how to get out on her own and did so quite often, it surprised me while sitting in the living room late at night watching TV that I heard her start screaming. She wasn't a big crybaby, not even when she got hurt. I knew something had to be wrong, so I ran into the far back room where she shared a room with her sister and walked in. At first I didn't see her, and her sister had fallen asleep on the couch next to me. I started to say, "What's the matter, baby girl?" When I first saw her, my whole body froze in terror. An old woman with grey hair pulled back into a bun wearing red and black striped silk top, and a long black skirt was bent over my daughter's crib, just staring and screaming her head off like she was studying her. As I stood there frozen, the old woman stayed hunched over, and moving just her head, turned her face in my direction. She had no eyes and was smiling at me. Not a friendly smile either, but an ominous one. I panicked. My mummy instincts kicked in and I dove for my kid, breaking the crib in the process. I got all of my kids out the house that night, and 2 weeks later we moved out. My husband and I visited Venice about 2 years ago. Our first day there we pretty much went right to bed, as we got there late. That night I woke up to my husband sweating profusely and staring at the corner of our room. I tried talking to him, but he wouldn't answer. I shook him awake, even though his eyes were open, and he told me that he saw a little boy in the corner of our room walking towards him. He was trying to scream, but he couldn't. The little boy disappeared as soon as we started shaking my husband. I'm not sure whether he just saw a ghost or had a bad dream. We just went back to sleep. I started having a dream about a little Venetian boy. He started walking towards me and whispered in my ear in Italian about how he died. I couldn't understand everything he was saying, as I speak fluent Spanish and very little Italian, so he decided to show me how the bad men cut his tongue out of his mouth and took his teeth. He told me he wasn't alone and that they were doing it to other people too. When I woke up, I told my husband about what the little boy had said and shown me. My husband's eyes immediately went wide when I told him about the tongues and teeth. He told me that when the little boy was walking towards him earlier, he was holding a bag full of tongues and another one with teeth. But he didn't tell me that before, because he didn't want to scare me. My husband is also a huge skeptic and always said he didn't believe in ghosts nor spirits, but after this, he is convinced we were both visited by the spirit of the same little boy. I'm not new to paranormal experiences. The apartment I'm now in, as well as most places I lived in growing up, had their fair share of spooky, but I've never had anything like this happen. Everyone in my apartment, dad, mum and brother, are all aware that we've had a ghost, and we've never seen it as an issue. We just deal with the weird things happening and the occasional apparition every 6 months or so. Last night I saw something I've never heard anyone mention before though. I was asleep on the couch in the living room, laying, so that when I got up I could see the dining room, kitchen and hallway to the bathroom. I randomly shot up at 2:45 and looked into the dining room and saw a white pillar. It was brighter than anything else I've ever seen, and it seemed to be phasing through the dining room table. It didn't move, but I grabbed my phone and shined my flashlight at it, which did nothing. It didn't get brighter or disappear. It was strange. I was in my house alone. I never actually go into the guest bedroom, but I was looking for a computer and so I went in. My AC was on so I could hear it, but when I walked into the guest bedroom all sound disappeared and I heard strange echoing whispers. It felt like I was being watched and left the room, but I went to close the door and saw about a 7-foot shadow floating. It was humanoid with a tattered black cloak and had a strange black gas lingering around it. The whispers seemed to be getting louder and louder and echoing around it. I was in the guest room doorway and it was close enough to touch, but I didn't touch it. I was just scared for my life. I turned around and sprinted back in the room. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and sat for about an hour in front of the hallway. The feeling of dread suddenly dissipated, and then the AC was audible once more. My family and I had moved into a different state and bought a house. I no longer live there, but I definitely remember a few odd things that happened while living there. Our house was built in the 70s and was a fixer-upper. A husband and wife had lived there, and a few years prior to us moving in, the wife had passed away from cancer. I didn't know this until after my first paranormal experience at the house, because my parents thought my sister and I would be scared if we knew someone had passed away there. My friend found out online that the lady had passed away in her home by Googling her name. My first experience was when I was in the basement doing my makeup. We were renovating the upstairs bathroom, so I had to use the one downstairs. When I was applying my mascara and was close to the mirror, I saw a black figure from the corner of my eye. It looked like a person was standing right behind me, and it felt like there was a dark presence. I turned around and there was literally nothing behind me. Does anyone know the significance of this dark figure? I'm still not sure what it is to this day. The second experience I had was when I was sleeping in the basement because we had family visiting and my grandma was sleeping in my bed. It was past midnight and I swear I could hear running back and forth in the upstairs hallway. I have 2 cats, but both of them were sleeping downstairs with me. I went to check upstairs and everyone was fast asleep. I continued to hear this stomping for about an hour, and I remember it being really hard to fall asleep that night. The last experience I had was the scariest. My sister and I had a friend over and we were chatting about how we thought our house was haunted. My sister always complained to me about how she hears footsteps in her room, which was weird because to me I had never heard any specifically in my room. We all decided to lay in my bed and see if we could hear anything. We're all in about 8th grade, so of course we're doing dumb stuff like this. We were silent for minutes on end, and then we heard a huge sound like someone had thrown something off my nightstand. It was the craziest thing. None of us had moved a muscle, and we heard that huge sound out the blue. We looked on the floor and nothing had been knocked onto the ground. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever. My dad never believed us when we said we thought it was haunted. However, there was one time he was inside the house, alone, and said he heard the cupboards in the kitchen opening and closing while he was in the basement. He said he came outside to ask if any of us were doing dishes, and we said no, and he thought it was weird but dismissed the whole thing. When I was little, I used to always sleep with my feet hanging off the bed, and in the morning my mum would wake me up by tickling my feet. Well, one morning I felt my feet being tickled and I woke up giggling. I opened my eyes expecting to see my mum telling me it's time to wake up, but there's no one there. I was immediately frightened because I wasn't dreaming and I had felt real fingers repeatedly tapping on the bottom of my feet. I eventually worked up the courage to go to my parents' room only to find them fast asleep. I got into bed with them and asked my mum if she had come to my room. She said no, and needless to say I didn't sleep with my feet hanging off the bed again. This happened when I was around 10. My family and I lived in this house where a lot of small but creepy things happened, like cabinet doors open when we came home, lamps turning off by themselves, the sounds of footsteps. My dad and stepmother laughed it off since it didn't happen, but my older sister and I were terrified. The scariest thing I remember happening was randomly waking up in the middle of the night to see my older sister standing at the side of my bed, as if she were looking down at me sleeping, but with her eyes closed, and a really creepy half smile. I called out her name and she slightly tilted her head, and then slowly started reaching her hands towards me. This probably wouldn't be as scary if she weren't completely white, her face, hair, pajamas, everything. She was my sister, but completely white, not transparent, just white. And as she started reaching her hand towards me, I got scared and covered my face and froze. When I peeked out from the blankets, she was gone. I never felt her touch me, and I never heard her walk away or go back to bed. Till this day, I still have no explanation for the experience, although I do have a very uneasy feeling that this wasn't my sister, and I'm open to any explanations. I grew up in North Country, San Diego. I don't live there anymore, but this story pertains to the road leading through Lake Hodges, a reservoir and hiking spot in Escondido. It's a gorgeous but spooky area. The lake is surrounded by sleepy canyons filled with yapping coyotes and old farmhouses spread out among big lots. There are barely any street lights on the residential streets cradling the lake. The lake itself has some dark history, only locals might know. A high school girl got sexually abused, and her life was ended while jogging along the main trail when I was around the same age. My best friend's sister and her friend found voodoo dolls and knives stuck into some oak trees along the trail once. Creepy stuff. San Diego looks nothing like the Deep South, but Lake Hodges has a similar complex about it. It feels like something unspeakable happened there. While I was in high school, 2009 to 11, my friends and I would drive around and smoke cigarettes. We listened to new music and had existential adolescent conversations. Often we would drive around at night. I believe the first time this happened was late winter 2010. We were driving down the windy road past the point of separating the dam from the rest of the lake, and as we were about to take a corner, we saw this figure of a tall man standing on the side of the road. He had his thumb up, looking to hitchhike. His hair was wet and dark. The best adjective I can conjure in this situation was that he looked slimy. He was wearing this wet trench coat and his face was worn. When our headlights met his eyes, they looked vacant, yet melancholy, staring off into space like a zombie. But still there was something soulful about them. I can't explain it, and it's been over a decade and I've had plenty of time to reflect on the strange sorrow I witnessed within him. He vaguely resembled a drowned pirate, and we were all terrified. A few months later, the same thing. We saw the same figure hitchhiking a bit further down the road. This time we were even more mortified. A hitchhiker in the same place, in the same clothes twice? A year or so later, I had returned from college for spring break and was catching up with the same friend, barreling down the road. Somehow the topic of the hitchhiker came up. My friend told me that she had seen him again recently, at a different spot on the same road at night. We commented on how he could be a ghost. I'm a major skeptic of literally everything. I rely on evidence and occasionally will accept reports of encounters with credible people. But, it has to be factual. Might be cliché so far as considering this is the internet and people lie all the time, but I'm hoping someone hears me out. When I was a kid, I used to see a tall woman wearing white with black hair enter my little sister's room, followed by a small baby crawling behind her at night. My sister and I had all sorts of experiences with being suddenly grabbed. I think we know the difference between a muscle twitch and an actual grab, and she never saw the woman, but I did, and she heard the woman constantly tell her, "They need me." It was terrifying. I have always been plagued with horrifyingly vivid, violent and graphic nightmares and night terrors, even to this day. But as an adult, I question the legitimacy of what we experienced as a kid, because, well, we have no proof. Fast forward to present day, I'm 30, she's 26, and she has a baby. When I was on the phone with her not long ago, she stepped away to get her kid who was crying, and I heard a hissing whisper say, "Stay with me," which gave me the heebie-jeebies, but I joked about hearing a ghost as soon as she left and she froze. She asked me what it said, and I told her, to which she replied, "Dude, there's a ghost in here, and my husband doesn't believe me, but I hear it all the time." So of course I'm like, that's creepy, but okay. A few weeks go by, and she recently messaged me saying her son was acting weird, and the moment she hears something again, she looks directly into a corner of the room, and she hears a whine. He's 2 years old, so it's that baby whine they do when they don't like something. Today she sent me videos from her camera monitor. Her son was sleeping and woke up saying, "Stop it," over and over, and then later on was repeating, go away," and wiggling around uncomfortably. I cannot help but be completely and utterly creeped out by this, because my sister isn't someone who makes stuff up for funsies or fake videos. I asked her if she could share it here, and she said no, to which I understand, and I know there will be naysayers, and I get that too, but I'm starting to question it more and more. This event happened to me when I was around 8 or 9. I'm going to start by explaining about a little shop in our town because this is connected to what happened. In our medium-sized town, we had this small bookshop that we went to frequently. We were homeschooled and they had a bunch of curriculum books that my mum would buy for our lessons. They also had other books, school supplies and CDs and movies to buy. One day I saw these necklaces besides the register. They were cheap but cute little necklaces with charms on them and such. I wanted one and asked my mum if I could get it. She said no. It wasn't a big deal and I quickly forgot about it. Now that you have context, I'll get to the story. This was in the mid-90s. Back then we lived far out in the country and our house was atop of a deep creek. We didn't have very many close neighbors, and the only kids who lived nearby were a boy and girl who lived on the other side of the creek. We hung out with them a lot, since they were around the same age. The creek was an excellent place for exploring. To us it seemed much bigger than it actually was, and we could spend hours down there playing on the wooden swing we had built, ice skating when the water froze over, or just pretending to be explorers. One of our favorite games was pretending we were hunting for treasure. Me and the little girl who lived on the other side of the creek would play this game together, and we would find the little rocks and things and pretended they were treasure. We were talking one day about how cool it would be if we found real treasure in the creek, like jewelry or something, and about a minute later we stumbled across something silvery half buried in the leaves. It was the exact same necklace I'd seen at the bookstore, still attached to the price tag. It was wet, as it was a rainy day, but the price tag was still pristine, as if it hadn't been in the leaves for long. On top of that, we'd already searched the area earlier in our game and hadn't seen it there. It would have been impossible for us to miss it. So it was like it appeared out of nowhere. Like typical kids, this didn't freak us out the way it should freak me out today. Instead, we ran home and I showed my mum. She got angry with me thinking I had stolen it. She recognized it as well and knew it was the same necklace I'd asked for weeks prior. I told her I hadn't taken it, and that honestly I thought she had bought it as a surprise for me and accidentally threw it away, where it ended up in the creek. She told me she hadn't bought it either, and I got really weirded out. How come it got here, miles away from town, buried in the leaves out in our creek in an isolated country home? Neither of us kids had bought nor stolen it, neither had our friend's parents or our parents. And now that we knew there was no explanation for that necklace just appearing, to me, the weirdest part was the price tag still attached. That meant that no wandering stranger had been wearing it and happened to drop it in the creek. It was obviously brand new. It also wasn't expensive enough to be bothered stealing from anyone's house, if there had been robbers using our creek as a getaway. I think it was maybe $5 if even. As a kid, I just saw this as good luck and asked my mum if I could keep it, but she insisted we return it to the store. We did, and sure enough they confirmed it was the exact same necklace that I had been wanting. I explained the story to the cashier, but I'm pretty sure the cashier just figured I had stolen it. I'm pretty sure my mum thought that too, since I couldn't prove it, and I wasn't dishonest. I don't blame her for thinking that, since there was no other way to explain it, and to this day it just remains an unsolved mystery. But I'd like to think a friendly ghost wanted to give me a small gift. I live in a studio apartment with my cat. I moved in around the 1st of July and nothing seemed out of the ordinary until my boyfriend came to visit for a few weeks in September. I had sleep paralysis, a dream of a decomposed lady with shoulder-length dark hair watching me and my boyfriend sleep from the foot of my bed. It freaked me the hell out. I woke up at 3 a.m. and couldn't get back to sleep for a few hours after this experience. I also see shadows at the end of my bed now, while I'm laying in bed looking for my phone, but I don't know if this is real or just my paranoia. After my boyfriend left, I noticed some more unusual things happen in my apartment. When I'd come home from work, all the cabinets in my kitchen were open, every single one of them. I thought maybe I had been leaving them open while being half asleep and dazed and rushing to get out the door, but I started making mental notes of making sure the cabinets and cupboards were shut before I left. To my surprise and somewhat dismay, each one was open today when I returned home. A picture of my boyfriend that I had placed on the shelf fell to the floor a few days ago, and it was not unsteady or near a draft. As I crawled into bed tonight, a cap from a water bottle flew off my nightstand and hit the wall across from me. Along with this, my cat runs around meowing and howling with his hair straight up. He's never done this, but since my boyfriend left, this seems to be becoming a regular occurrence at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. I wish I could calm him, but I don't know what's wrong. I realize I might sound bonkers at this point, but I found out a 40-year-old woman was actually strangled by her boyfriend in this building 20 years ago. I don't think it was a coincidence that all of this seemed to start around the time my boyfriend came, and think that perhaps this lady may have been trying to warn me, or she's angry or just sad. I want to help her cross over, or at least request that she leaves my cabinets and cupboards alone and stop spooking my cat. If anyone has any advice, it'd be appreciated. This happened 16 years ago. I was in middle school, and during reading time I found an old, tattered-looking book on one of the shelves. It was an esoteric book that talked about ghosts and ghouls and other weird things. I focused my attention on the one chapter entitled Bloody Mary. This is the name for an arguably evil queen, Mary I of England, who had over 280 religious dissenters burned at the stake. This chapter gave direction on how to summon the ghost of Bloody Mary. The book said it would have to be at night in front of a mirror, and you would have to chant the words Bloody Mary between 50 to 100 times for the ghost to appear. Simple enough. The book even showed an image of what she may look like. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm at a giant cookout at an old rural Massachusetts home with many kids my age, between the ages of 7 to 16. I, with all the confidence and courage of a boy just hitting puberty, decided to tell them about how to summon on this ghost. Everyone was actually excited and decided to follow me into this horror. I and about 10 other kids found a giant full-length mirror in this dank basement for us all to sit in front of and to try with an experiment. It was perfect. Being still a little scared, I got my dad to do it with us the first time. And he wasn't taking it seriously at all. 9:30 p.m. we started our first try while my dad was joking around at first. No dice. It was still a little light out and we chanted Bloody Mary, but nothing happened. Not discouraged, we all tried again at midnight. This time it was pitch dark in the room and my dad wasn't there to change the atmosphere. We were serious and it was creepy and we began chanting. All was silent outside and inside as we rhythmically went on, spellbinding, and at about the 75th time we said the words, something happened. There was an eerie white shimmer at the center of the mirror, spaced out horizontally by a few feet. We went on 5 or 10 more times with the speed of lightning, and a ghostly face zoomed into the center of the mirror facing us all. It was of pure white light, bald, and had huge dark spaces where the eyes should be. The slits of the nose and openings of the mouth also black. Bloody Mary stared menacingly at us. A bunch of little kids just performed a seance, and as soon as she vanished we all screamed at the top of our lungs and booked it haphazardly up the stairs to turn the light on. We were all shaken, but talked amongst each other, verifying we all saw the same thing. Ghosts exist, people, and still to this day I sometimes get a little creeped out at night in front of mirrors. My family is very musically talented. Everyone sings, everyone can pick out a tune on any instrument they choose, and my brother has been playing piano since he was 9. Can't read notes but is extremely gifted as a musician, with an ear for picking songs out. One day when I was 8, he taught me a few new chords that he thought would add some flair to the song I was learning. I practiced the rest of the afternoon after he left for his apartment. Fast forward to later that night. Everyone was asleep and I woke up with a sweet, simple song being played. My room and the piano room shared a wall, and I remember thinking that my brother had come back to our house to hang out some more. I lay there kind of sleepy when I hear the music pick up from a slow waltz to a peppery jazz song. At first I was thinking of crawling out of bed to watch his hands to learn what he was doing, but then it morphed into this sloppy macabre tune where it was a ton of 7th chords and played on the lower end of the piano, making it a super dark and bass-driven piece. Then it sounded like whatever was playing the piano started to mash keys, like if you got upset and started smacking the piano with your palms. Absolute chaos. This went on for 1 to 2 minutes and then it just stopped. I've seen and heard mimics of my brother's before, and I was seriously just waiting for something to look like my brother to walk into my room. Ever since, I always have to put the little sliding cap over the piano keys before I go to bed. I see it so they don't get dusty. In reality, I just don't want some ghosty goo playing his favorite songs in the middle of the night. Years ago, when I was small, my mother's mum told me about the Methodist Church Tower in Homewood. Her mother told her that her mum told her. The church had, I guess, what you call a man of means who had a lot of pull there. Him and his wife had 1 daughter. At the time, they had planned out her life. Well, when she turned 16, she fell in love with a young man who didn't have wealth and her father considered him beneath her. The young man went to the father, and you know the usual hand in marriage, courting, etc., and the father sent him away. I think he ran him out of town, and then forbade him from ever seeing his daughter again. So one day the man and his wife go out and the daughter is at the house. So when they leave, she gets dressed up, promptly gets her father's razor and gets some poison to go to her room, and her parents return to find their daughter on the bed. Well, there's the funeral and such, and there's a young lady put in a silk dress, buried, and things move along. After about a month after she died, someone was up early in the morning and passed the church, looked up into the attic through the window, and guess who was looking back? It was her. The whole town say they always saw her in the early mornings in the dress she was buried in, with a cold blank stare. After this began happening regularly, the parents left town never to return. This happened to me 2 months ago. It was early September, and my aunt had just passed away. It was night time and had just gotten to bed. I pulled the blanket over myself and laid there for a few minutes trying to fall asleep. Suddenly, I felt the blanket start to tighten around my foot. It literally felt like someone was pushing my foot down and squeezing the blanket. I immediately jumped out of bed and ran into the hall. I had no idea what had just happened. I just stood in the hallway, shaken up, trying to figure out what had just occurred. I paced the hallway, and then decided to tell my parents about what happened. My mum said it was just my aunt tucking me in, which didn't make me feel any better about what happened. Since it was late, I went and sat in my room with the light on for a while. Eventually, I did fall asleep, but not for quite a while. My cousin's family occupied my dad's old house overseas for a period. We would sometimes stay there some nights when we were on vacation. Since I was really young, there wasn't really enough room. I would sleep in my cousin's bed. So this one night we were playing cards and it was getting late. The parents come and tuck us into sleep, and I am having problems sleeping as I was unfamiliar with the room. I try and lay on my stomach and then all of a sudden feel something touching the back of my neck. I look at my cousin and he has already fallen asleep. I try swiping it away and it keeps happening all through the night. I just can't fall asleep. Then after a while it gets to the point that I'm feeling restless and decide to turn around in bed. When this happens, I see a really dark, pitch-black thing hovering above us. I try to scream, but nothing is coming out my mouth. I'm frozen there for a few seconds before I close my eyes and just imagine that I saw nothing. I turn around again and lay on my stomach. The same touching feeling on the back of my neck starts happening again. Somehow I fall asleep. The next night I end up sleeping in my parents' room, and then for the rest of the trip I stay over at my grandma's house. I don't tell anyone about the incident. We're over at my dad's old place the next vacation we decide to take, and I bring up the story to my aunt. She explains to me that when they built the house, one of the builders had fallen off the roof and died. One time when I was about 17, my parents left for a weekend with my little sister, and I stayed home alone at our house. It was coming up on finals week for me, and they were going to a wedding of a friend of theirs. I was a little paranoid, not of ghosts, but of someone gonna find out I'm a 17-year-old girl home alone and come over and end me in my sleep. I live in East Buddha nowhere, so it was a stupid fear, but I was still paranoid. The second night there, I woke up from a deep sleep with the feeling my dad was checking up on me. I rolled over and looked towards the doorway. There was a faceless form standing there, one hand on the doorframe, looking into my room. I saw it very clearly and said, "I'm fine, Dad," and rolled over to turn my back to it and went back to sleep. The next morning, of course, I felt freaked. What the hell was that? What if it had been an intruder? But during the night I actually woke up and saw it? Nope. Just pissed at being awakened. I was staying in my grandparents' cabin in the mountains of Idaho during junior year of college during spring break. My roomie and I decided to go up there from San Diego on a whim to get out of town for a while and drink and ride ATVs and watch movies and just unwind a bit. He slept in the guest room and I slept in my grandparents' bed. They at the time lived elsewhere because they hadn't retired yet, and this cabin was to be their retirement house. One morning while it was still quite early, everything was very blue, as things tend to be at dawn. I woke up with a shot to see something standing over me on the left side of the bed. It was a dark hooded figure that I would best describe as essentially what a ring wraith from the Lord of the Rings movie would look like. It stood for a second and then just seemed to melt to the ground and disappear. I couldn't move a muscle, not even my eyes. I was scared out of my mind and totally freaked out. I laid there in bed for a good 10 minutes completely freaking and praying, as I'm from a very Christian family. Finally I fell back asleep, then promptly woke up and forgot all about it for a few weeks. Then one day I was walking to class and everything just randomly hit me all at once. Not only did I remember the events, but I remembered that my grandma had told me she experienced the same exact thing in her house in Illinois, where they still lived at the time. with something that sounded like the same thing standing at the left side of her bed, standing over her in the night, and then melting to the floor, but not before audibly informing her that it was going to end her life. It freaked me out. When my grandma saw it, she woke up my grandpa after the event ended and said, "Honey, Satan was just here. He said he was gonna kill me." My grandpa sleepily replied with, "Oh, is that all?" He then prayed with her, and they went back to sleep. I know about sleep paralysis, and I am aware that it very well could have been a dream, but regardless of whatever really happened, it scared the hell out of me. My grandfather was a railway engineer his whole life, and we used to play with toy trains all the time when I was young. A week after he died, my favorite toy train came on in the middle of the night. Turned off, no effect, it continues. Took out the batteries and it was still going. My dad literally takes it outside and beats it with a bat, and it still runs. He ended up throwing in the woods and it almost runs until the morning. My mum didn't sleep for weeks, and it didn't hit me how crazy it was for years after. I saw something in my grandma's house when I was about 7 or 8. I remember it being near Christmas time and my whole family was at my grandma's house. The way the house was set up, to get to the kitchen and dining area from the back room where the TV and SNES were, I had to walk through the living room that no one used and was closed off from the rest of the house by a set of French doors. Well, it was late at night, and I was the last one to leave the back room. As I entered the living room from the back room, I noticed someone going through my grandma's closet. I thought it was my oldest cousin, who must have been around 18. I asked him if he could grab me some of the candy that my grandma kept on the top shelf. After I had said this, he turned to me and I realized it wasn't my cousin. It was a dark figure with burning red eyes. I looked directly into its eyes and it started to hiss at me. I ran out that room crying and screaming, ran straight into the cousin I thought it was, and then punched him in the stomach. My family was confused and asked me what was wrong. I explained that my cousin had tried to scare me. They tell me that he'd been in the kitchen the whole time. I'm still not always comfortable sleeping in my grandma's house, but I haven't seen anything since. My wife and I, then girlfriend, were hanging out in a cemetery late one night, and as we were leaving, we happened upon a large mausoleum. We figured it would be funny to walk up to the door and stand by it, so we did. Shortly after getting to the top, we said something to the effect of, "Wouldn't it be creepy if we heard voices inside?" So we leaned our head towards the door. As we were listening, we heard some quick shuffling and a bang on the door coming from the inside. We were both so shocked that I don't think either of us believed what we heard. I told her we should go and she quickly agreed. It wasn't until we were well away from the place that we both started talking. In a, "This is gonna sound crazy, but did you hear?" Once we realized we both heard it, we freaked the hell out, and of course haven't been back since. This happened in 2006 in upstate New York. My friends and I were taking a camping trip upstate. We're from the city. And we arrived at the location at nighttime, so it was very dark. Everyone got off the buses, and we were all standing around outside the cabins waiting to eat. I saw one of the chaperones, Bert, standing near some trees a few yards from the cabin. Bert is a tall, broad-shouldered guy, and he was wearing a black pea coat. I was with everyone else when I turned my head and saw him, and he was gesturing for me to come closer. I started running towards him. He continued to gesture and encouraged me to come closer to him. My brother, who was with the group, shouted behind me, "Stan?" I turned around to see him, and was about to tell him that I was going to Bert, but then I turned around. He wasn't there. No one was there. He had vanished. I looked back at my brother and the rest of the group and saw Bert with the other adults. So the question is, Who the hell was that? When I was about 9 years old, me and my cousins stayed in an old farmhouse for a holiday with family. We got it into our heads that the place was haunted because the house would make odd creaks and noises, and we were way up in the attic. We spent our time mostly playing Lego, building this big town on the floor of the room. It had everything: police station, school, even a bar for the dads. One day we went for an outing to this weird old mine that had been turned into a creepy museum for dolls and trolls, filled with row upon row of horrible little faces and eyes staring. It wasn't pleasant, and we soon left. When we got back to the house, my cousin and I ran upstairs to our room, only to find that our Lego town had been tampered with. Things had been moved around. One of the buildings had been destroyed and all the Lego men had fallen over. They were all just lying there facing downwards. As you can imagine, this scared the crap out of my 9-year-old self. But we were nothing if not inquisitive and scientific, and decided to test it to see if it was something supernatural messing with Lego Town or just some cruel family prank. We rigged up an elaborate pulley system from the door handle with string to spill water on the floor if anyone opened the door. The idea was that when we came in after the trip that day, we'd listen to hear if there was a splash. We would also do the classic taping a hair to the door crack to test if it had been broken. We left for the day with everything in place and made sure we were the last out the house too. What do you know, when we got back the hair was unbroken, and opening the door we heard the water splash on the floor. Yet, the Lego town had been rearranged, the men had been lying flat, it had been rebuilt and destroyed. We did not sleep that night. When I was a kid, I liked to climb on the sofas, kitchen counters, and everything like that, to imagine I was on some sort of adventure. One day I decided to climb the washer and dryer. As I was reaching on top of the dryer, my foot slipped and I began to fall backwards. Then I felt a hand push me upright on top of the dryer, and I instantly turned around and expected my angry Asian dad banning me from climbing on stuff, but no one was there. Now, I would have fallen backwards and smacked my head on the edge of the granite counter had someone not been there to save me. I couldn't believe what happened, so smart me decided to pretend to fall again to see if it would happen again. This time the thing didn't help me at all. You know when you're looking for something you can't find, but you go through a series of stages of desperation? You'll start looking where you think it is, start looking where you think it might be, go back to where you think it should have been, and then look more thoroughly, and then look all over the places it could possibly be and look there, then go back to all those places over and over with an increasing level of frustration and annoyance until you find yourself pulling out the bottles under the sink in the kitchen, even though you're looking for a piece of clothing. So that's me at 17, alone, at home and desperately looking for my only clean pair of pants that I know should be somewhere in my dresser. I've checked everywhere in my bedroom, in the laundry room, in my parents' and brothers' and sisters' rooms, and everywhere in between, and only have a few minutes left before I have to head back to school wearing the pants that got crap spilled all over them in shop class last period. Finally, I'm down in the laundry room surrounded by piles of clothes that I've tossed all over the place and give up. I shout, "Where the hell are my pants?" And just as I'm about to head back to school covered in engine oil, I decide to check my bedroom one more time. The laundry room is in the basement. My bedroom is at the front of the house on the second floor. So in order to get back to my room, I have to walk up the basement steps, through the front hallway, in order to get to the main stairs. Up the stairs to the second floor, and then along the upstairs hallway to my room. And right there, in the upstairs hallway, halfway between the top of the stairs and the door to my room, are the pants I was looking for. They're not bunched or folded up in a ball and not stuffed anywhere out of sight. They're lying flat and full length on a carpet in the middle of the hallway, as though someone had just placed them there. There's nothing else on the third floor around them, but there's nothing lying on top of them or otherwise concealing them. I've walked between my bedroom and the laundry room half a dozen times by now, so if they were there, I would have seen them. Both my parents are at work and both my siblings are at school, and not even the cat is in the house. I stand there in my underwear and just stare at them for a minute, then shrug, look around and say, "Hey, thanks," and put my pants on to go to school. People are always skeptical when I tell this story, but here's to hoping that you guys have an open mind. Basically, we used to think our house was haunted, not because of anything overtly spooky, but simply because strange things would happen. Things would vanish and reappear in an odd place a little while later. Doors would shut themselves, nothing really ghostly. It was more of a family joke. You see, an old woman was killed by her son in the house. She passed away in hospital, but he pushed her down the stairs. Perhaps the old lady was bored. Anyway, it all kind of climaxed one night. The old lady ghost took it to the next level. It was about 3 a.m. and there was a huge crash in our kitchen. Naturally, my parents woke up thinking we were being burgled, and my dad ran downstairs. What he found was an incredibly strange scene, and so he called me and my mum downstairs to have a look. There were no signs of entry, no smashed windows, doors still locked, and obviously no one in the house. In the middle of our kitchen floor was a drawer, standing on its side with all the utensils that were kept in it neatly positioned around it in a circle. Our dog was also backed into the corner, trembling and whimpering, as we tend to keep him in the kitchen of night. We've never really understood what happened there. Just put it down to the old lady making her exit. Stuff stopped disappearing after that. Doors no longer randomly slammed, except of course for natural reasons. Outside of Huntsville, Texas, there's a road they call Demon Road that runs parallel to another road. In between is an old cemetery and dirt road connecting the two roads. Rumor has it that on Demon Road a few years ago, there was a car accident and a police shootout that left 2 people dead. The car was never taken from the spot it crashed, and the angry spirits never left. About 4 years ago, I went down there with some friends to investigate. We parked on the dirt road, and a truck pulled in from the other side. KC daylight is on, blinding me. A woman got out. I thought I was gonna die. Technically we were trespassing. She walked to my window and said, "You be careful." She got back in her truck and drove off. I got out, rubbed some dirt on my car in an attempt to reveal fingerprints, and headed down Demon Road. About a quarter of a mile down the road, I felt a cold punch on my chest and froze in my tracks. I tried to walk forward and again felt pressed on my chest. I turned back to my car with a friend while everyone else continued to the car. I decided something was telling me that it was a bad idea to continue. And about 30 minutes later, the group came back and we started comparing pictures, audio, and mass spec readings. We caught some quality pictures and mass spec readings, but no audio. One of the girls asked the guy next to her, "Why did you pull my hair?" He said he didn't. And 10 seconds later she screamed, "Something jerked my ponytail!" And we scrambled back to our cars and sped back to the city. When we returned to civilization, we got out and saw handprints on the truck and drawings all over my car made in finger. The most compelling were the 2 smeared handprints on my truck, like someone was hanging on, lost grip and slid down. The Roman numeral XII, or 12, was also fingered into the dust. I don't try and make sense of what happened that night, but it'll always be burned into my mind as the absolute most scariest encounter of my life. I used to live in a duplex, next to an active, albeit commercial, railroad track a few 100 feet from my house. Anyway, I always had a peculiar feeling that I was never truly alone in the house. I was always with my mother and brother upstairs, watching television, when suddenly this blaring sound starts up from downstairs where my bedroom and my brother's are. After a second or two, it registers that it's the sound of a Hess truck or something similar. As any of you know that have played with one of these toys, the only way to switch it on or off was to slide the switch to the corresponding position. My brother and I, not being more than 9 and 7, refused to go to turn it off, so my mother goes down to do just that, and brings it back up. For the next few minutes we start battling the truck back and forth trying to activate the sound. However, even if we could, we had no pets at the time that may have triggered such an event. Years later, in 2008, I was living in a different house going to college, and I'm up late working on an assignment due in a few hours. My wife and I had gotten into a spat a few hours earlier, and she had gone to bed before me. It was around 3 a.m. at this time, and it's when I hear footsteps outside the study. Now this house has 2 floors, then a basement and an attic that had been converted into a living space / 3rd floor, with the attic entrance directly next to the closed door to the study. Upon hearing the footsteps, I hear the attic door open and someone clearly goes upstairs and walks around. Now we had put a futon, TV, and some other stuff up there to relax from time to time when we decided to have some time to ourselves, as it was my roommate, wife, and I. So I assumed it was either my wife or my roommate. Anyway, upon finishing the paper, I open the door and see the closet door is open and the light is off. I open the door to go upstairs, as whoever went up there never made it back down, and find the attic completely empty, lights off, etc. I come back down and look at my roommate's room to see if she's sleeping in her room, in her bed, and go to my wife, who's my then girlfriend's room, and see the same thing. Upon asking them the next day, they confessed that neither had woken up that night to do anything, especially walk up the stairs. To further the creepy factor, a few months before this, my wife had gone to bed before me, and I was left watching TV in another room, with the roommate out this time round. She said that she's tossing and turning and suddenly feels someone looking at her from the foot of the bed. When she rolls over to look at who she assumes is me, she sees a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed. At this point she comes running into the room I'm in, only to realize I have been in the room the whole time, as I'm wrapped up in blankets and pillows. I've had multiple experiences where a simple explanation simply won't do in this house, and in quite a few other places too. I once stayed at a mansion in Ireland with my entire family. We rented the whole thing out. It was built in the 1400s, and I didn't know the story, but apparently one of the owners had ended their life back in the 1700s or something. I had the room next to his bedroom. Now, I never really had an opinion on the paranormal before this. I always found it interesting to watch on TV, but never really could tell based on an opinion without first-hand experience. Well, first night there, the slave bells that rang from the 2nd floor in his room to the basement began ringing, along with the lights flickering in the master hallway. Every time we left the mansion and came back, all the window curtains would all be neatly folded to the side of the windows. We unfolded them every night to keep the light out, and the creepiest thing of all was on the 4th floor there was a tiny pink door in the corner of the room. It was about up to my waist. When you opened it, it was complete and utter blackness. You could not see a thing. Now we heard stories from the bartender at the pub next door that we went to every night that, legend has it, if you opened the door, you had a chance of taking home spirits. Obviously, we thought this was a myth. So on the last day, my dad was going around with the tape recorder and sure enough, opened the mysterious pink door. Now, not only did we catch a floating face-like apparition on the footage, we had some strange stuff happen to us when we returned home, such as furniture flipping and the sound of breaking glass and the curtains being folded. But that only lasted a week or two. Needless to say, I have a different outlook on the paranormal after that trip. When I was 14, my parents separated. So my mum bought a smaller house and my brother, sister and I were all still in school, so we moved in with her. After a few weeks I thought everything was normal, but my mum kept saying that when she was left home alone, she would hear footsteps and hear children playing in the bottom level, as it was a split-level home, which was where I slept. Then it started happening. I had a really old-school clock radio, and I put it all the way across my room, so that when it went off, I had to get out of bed to turn it off. Well, it started going off every morning at 3 a.m., which, as some of you may know, is referred to as the witching hour. The scariest part about it was that when I would get up to turn it off, as soon as I was about a foot away to bend over and do just that, it would shut off by itself, and I would hear a little chuckle coming from behind me. This happened no matter how long I stayed in bed when it started going off. Sometimes I would lay there for 20 minutes, other times 5 seconds, but whenever I got up to turn it off, it would shut off by itself. After about a month, I started sleeping right next to it, and then it got weirder. It would start going off at 3 a.m., and I would immediately shut it off. Then it started going off at 3 a.m. and 4:06 a.m. every morning. So I would get up at these times, and then it continued, 5:12, a 66-minute increase. It was absolutely mind-boggling. So much so that I slept on the floor with my hand on the alarm, knowing it was going to go off. I obviously got almost no sleep over this stretch. About 3 months after all of this began, I woke up one morning at 3 a.m. to the alarm and screamed at the top of my lungs, "I know you're there, just please leave me alone and let me sleep." The alarm shut off on its own and never went off again at that time. It completely solidified my belief in the paranormal, and it has taught me that as long as you acknowledge their presence, if they're kind, they'll leave you alone. After my incident, my brother started experiencing similar difficulty. I told him how I handled it, and he did the same thing. It also never happened to him after he acknowledged their presence. You'd think it's over, but it got weirder since then. I haven't thought about it in a while, and my mum still lives in that house. 3 or 4 years ago now, my mum's now ex-boyfriend tried to end his life in the garage by taking sleeping pills and turning on his car with the window down. Carbon monoxide. His 16-year-old daughter was in my old room in the house when he tried to do it. My mum came home to him on the couch in the living room still alive. He told her that he remembered being carried out of the car and into the house where he fell back asleep. Now I hated this guy, and he was the worst, but when my mum told me that story, I could think of how whatever spirits were there didn't want him, so they brought him inside so that he would live instead of die and be stuck around the house with them. Like I said, it sounded like children who were stuck there, so the dynamic of most of them wanting to have a crappy father figure being there with them weirdly made sense to me. My boyfriend and I moved into a new apartment a few weeks ago. Not too long ago, he got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and left the bedroom door open to crack. After a few minutes, I looked up and saw him staring at me through the open door, smiling. I told him that he was being creepy and to knock it off. Then I heard the toilet flush and he walked out of the bathroom. No one else was home. This isn't my own story, but my atheist, non-spiritual, cynical best friend's afterlife story. To know this kid and have him tell me this story while he's visibly trembling scared the hell out of me, and still does. He moved into his grandfather's house a few years ago, so that he could take care of him, since his grandfather was frail and on his way out from cancer. One night after his grandfather had taken a turn for the worse, my friend was sitting in the living room watching whatever comes on basic cable at 2 a.m., as he didn't get home from work until around midnight every night. He heard a loud crash coming from his grandfather's bedroom. Thinking that his grandfather had fallen out of bed again, he ran down the hall, opened the door, and saw his grandfather still in bed, but with his back towards the door, and his right arm reaching for something in the far corner of the bedroom. That's when my friend saw sparks floating in and out of the wall and ceiling. He watched this for about 3 to 4 minutes. His grandfather's arm went back down and the sparks disappeared through the far wall. My friend closed the bedroom door, thinking that he was completely losing his mind and hallucinating, sat back down in the living room, and the next morning he was sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast, when his grandfather sat down with his oatmeal or whatever, and they were just both eating there in silence. My friend then goes, "Hey, Pop, I heard something loud, a crashing noise coming from your room last night. Was everything all right?" His grandfather immediately said, "You saw them?" Then went on about how his dead brother, cousin, and some other dead family members came to take him away, and he was telling him he wasn't ready to go and that they needed to go away, and some other stuff that I can't remember. His grandfather died about a month later. He told me this story a few days after it happened. I've heard him tell it a few times since, and it never changes. I was 16, and my parents had left me for a week while they went on holiday together. I'm a pretty independent person and don't mind my own company, so I wasn't that bothered. Well, about halfway through the week, I had gone to bed about midnight and was just dozing off when the dog went absolutely mental. Now, he stopped barking and stands at the top of the stairs, looking down and cocking his head. Just at that moment, I hear the unmistakable sound of someone trying the handle on the back door. I was scared, and did the first thing that I could think of, which was to start switching on all the lights. Must have done the trick because it stopped. There are so many weird paranormal things that have happened to me over the years that it's difficult to choose just one thing to share. Well, I was babysitting my nephew and niece with my then husband. It was around 11 p.m. when someone knocked on the living room window. Now I thought my brother had come back and didn't want to ring the doorbell in case he woke the kids up. Well, the ex gets up, opens the door and there's no one there. As he's standing there a bit nonplussed, the knocking starts up again, so he walks out and checks all around the house. There are no trees that could have hit the window, and there's nowhere a person could have hidden. I thought that maybe it's one of the children messing around, so I snuck upstairs and found them both asleep. All this time the knocking is carrying on. It got to a point where it woke up my niece and she came downstairs and asked what the noise was. I couldn't answer her. It must have lasted at least 45 minutes and stopped as abruptly as it started. The next thing happened a few nights ago, in the flat that I now live in. We had friends stay overnight, and again, it was late at night. It was just the two of us in the living room. The ex had taken himself to bed, and Gary was on the phone to his girlfriend, so not really paying attention. All of a sudden, a figure walked past the open doorway. It looked like a tall man had been cut out of jet black paper. The logical part of my mind is to try and dismiss it as being the ex going to the bathroom. The trouble is that he hadn't gone past the doorway in the first place, as I would have seen him, and the figure appeared to be shorter than him anyway. I'm at a fancy restaurant in town, in the woman's washroom. There were only 2 stalls. I'm in one stall finishing up when I hear high heels cling-clang into the stall beside me. I think nothing of it until I come out and see the stall door wide open with no one else in. I shrug it off as nothing until I'm washing my hands and as I'm there drying them off on a paper towel, I hear this from the stall in a whisper. "Who's there?" I go wide-eyed, throw my paper towel out, and get the hell out of there. Needless to say, I try to avoid that bathroom now. This happened when I was really little. My mum and grandma worked as closing janitors in a movie theatre, and since I had no babysitter, they would take me along, and we would be there until the sun rose. It was always just us three after hours, so I got to run around and have fun. One night I go to the handicapped restroom, which is just one toilet and one sink. I use the toilet and I'm washing my hands, and look up, and there's a shadowy man standing behind me. I screamed like I was being taken and run to my grandma and didn't leave her side for the rest of the night. To this day, mirrors still make me feel nervous. This is a story my mum had told me when I was younger. At the time, my mum was a young girl of around 9. She was in a room with 2 of her sisters, which they shared as a bedroom. My mum and her sisters were on the bed when they looked at the window and saw something. It was the face of the devil, she says. The window, my mum said, had a very narrow gap with a cement wall and fence behind it. No human being would be able to fit in that gap. My mum and her sisters, of course, ran out their room and into the little living room where my grandma was. My mum and aunts were able to confirm this story and said that they still remember it very clearly. The wild, ugly face. This is a story that happened to me when I was 10 years old and in the 5th grade. It's a story about my first ghost sighting. It happened on an average night. It was me, my parents, and my 2 sisters. I'm the middle child, and I'm a guy. It was later in the night after dinner, and I was playing GTA San Andreas on my PS2. For the record, this was back in 2008. After a few hours, my parents sent us to bed because we had school in the morning. I always had trouble falling asleep as a kid, and still do to this day. I remember the layout of the house, but have a hard time describing it. But I'll try the best I can. There are 2 hallways when you walk inside. The first hallway is where my room and my younger sister's room were, on the left side. The right side had the guest bathroom and the water heater closet. My room was at the end of the hallway. When you walked down the hallway, you would turn right into the second hallway, where my older sister's room was on the left. And the storage closet and master bathroom were on the right. There was also a laundry room at the very end on the right. My parents' room was at the very end of the hallway. So I was laying on my bed, with my door open because our cat would always come into my room to chill out and sleep with me. I was waiting for her to come, so I turned over and looked into the hallway. I then caught a 2-second glimpse of a woman walking out over the second hallway where my parents' room was, passing my room and walking out of sight. I didn't hear her footsteps, but I saw her clear as day, and I can still explain in detail exactly what she looked like. She was tall and skinny, her hair was long, and it was a mess, and she was wearing what looked like an old, dirty dress. It looked brown in the short moment I saw her. She appeared to be praying as she walked past my room and down the other hallway. This, of course, freaked me out, but I didn't flip out and start screaming and crying nor running to my parents. I was 10, and probably would have looked like a coward if I did. I really didn't know what to think, nor do I remember what my reaction was. I probably just thought, I saw a ghost, but then brushed it off. I of course brought it up at school the next day with my friends, and they busted my balls telling me I was lying, and that I got scared. I told my sisters about it weeks later, and they both claimed to have seen the same thing. That was the only time I ever saw it. I really don't know if it was a ghost or my eyes playing tricks on me. But we moved out that house 10 years ago. I go to a historically all-women's college in Mississippi, USA. As you can imagine, a bunch of girls bored in dormitories can create some mischief. My roommate had recently injured her knee and was bedbound for a few days. It was a Sunday night, and our weekend homework load was light, so boredom set in quick. I was sitting in my dorm room with my roommate and our friend trying to find a way to pass our free time. Suddenly our friend exclaimed, "I know what we can do that would be fun." My roommate and I looked at her with curious eyes. "Let's play a Ouija board." My roommate and I looked at each other with apprehension. In the southern United States, people are incredibly superstitious. Supernatural phenomena and the occult are mostly avoided out of fear. Our college was already rumored to be haunted, so my roommate and I were feeling a little on edge about the idea. "We don't have a board," I said to my friend, and my roommate nodded in agreement. "Well, this website says that you can just make your own and it works the same." So we took a Sharpie marker and some leftover presentation board from a project. We took a shot glass and even lit some candles to scare ourselves. We all placed our fingers lightly on the glass and waited. Nothing happened at first, and we all sort of giggled and felt a little scared. Then there was the slightest movement of the glass. "Oh, one of you must have jerked the glass," I asked. "I thought it was you," we each said to one another. The mood in the dorm room instantly changed. It seemed to get darker in the room, even though the candles were flickering lively. The air became thick. The glass began to move to hello. My roommate snatched her hand away, protesting this activity. Our friend insisted that we continue now, that we've made contact, and began to ask who we were speaking to, and they said they were a girl. We asked if they had gone to our school in the past, and they replied with a yes. Suddenly it moved to Z, then to O, and then to Z, and then to O again. We instantly ended the session and prayed for protection. We opted to dispose of the homemade board, so our friend and I decided to bury the board off campus past the train tracks. We were leaving the dorm room to the elevator, and as we were on the top floor, the elevator wouldn't work at all. It had never malfunctioned before, so it was strange timing. My roommate was left in our dorm, and when we returned, she claimed that her phone and laptop also began to malfunction. Strange things continued to happen, and still do. This was our freshman year of 2016, and people still say that strange things occur on the top floor of the dormitory. Whatever we made contact with that night might still be around. My wife and I lived in an apartment in San Antonio, Texas in 2004. We adopted a cat who was so docile in the beginning, but over time the cat started acting weirdly. She would hiss at random places in the apartment, would attack the air and walls, and at the same time we started to notice things. We would randomly see shadows on the wall. I saw the shadow of a man with a hat. We lived on the second story of the apartment row, and one morning I woke up to what I thought was my wife coming inside after leaving work. I heard footsteps, the door opening and closing, and then the stereo playing. I got up to see why she was back, and I couldn't find her. I called her cell and she answered right before she went through the gate on base, so I knew it couldn't have been her. Anyway, bunch of weird occurrences. I've had a lot of run-ins with the paranormal, but the one story that stands out in my mind is something that happened 2 years ago. Me and 4 of my friends were bored as hell sitting in one of their houses. We had the idea to have a seance because, hey, we're in high school and it sounds fun. We look up the instructions online and they seem simple enough. Light 3 candles, put some food on the table, turn the lights off, hold hands and call the spirits. Only problem was we didn't have 3 candles. We jury-rigged a single candle with 3 wooden kebabs sticking out of it to light. Genius. We all linked hands, and I led the seance because I'd done this thing before, like Ouija board and stuff. I called upon the deceased grandfather of one of my friends and waited a minute. It was then I realized I had forgotten what to do next in the ceremony, and didn't really feel like there was anything there. Keep in mind that the single candle we did have, that we had stabbed the burning kebab sticks into, was a thick Yankee candle, the kind that comes in a jar. I decided to let go of my friend's hands to run to the computer to check the instructions. Literally, the second I break hands with my friend, a chunk of glass breaks off and pops into the air and lands on the table. And not a small chunk either. Of course, we all freak out and say goodbye. The skeptics in the group quickly deduce that the fire from one of the sticks caused the glass to crack, but I'm doubtful that a flame would cause thick glass to explode like that. My friend claimed that a spirit followed him home from his former boss's house, which was supposedly haunted by the spirit of a man. I was hanging at my friend's house one day. My friend was in the restroom while I was waiting in his living room. I kept feeling cold flashes, which was strange as it was summer. I tried to ignore it until I thought I heard someone breathing next to my ear. It was starting to get really creepy, and what finally drove the nail home for me was when I looked at the door which separated the living room from the kitchen, and it was cracked open, and I saw an eye staring at me. I don't remember seeing anything else or who was staring at me. All I saw was pure darkness surrounding that eye. I prayed to God that it was just my old friend being a creep. I ran to the door and opened it, but the eye was gone and there was no one there. My friend came out the bathroom a few seconds later, and I knew it couldn't have been him because the bathroom was a good 10 feet away from the door. I am as afraid as hell to go to his house now. 11 years ago, around 2:30 to 3 a.m., my girlfriend woke me up. She was shaking and put her face into my arms and chest and said, "He's over us. He's in here." Something to that effect. I gather myself while my eyes start to focus. Then once they're focused, I saw a dark shadow floating above both of us. I tried getting up, but it pushed me down. I couldn't scream, move, or yell. I began praying in my head, and then after a few seconds I started to be able to say the words out loud. It disappeared and we both just lay there. I think I stayed up for another 3 hours until the sun started to come up. Really weird. The weirdest part is that we both saw this figure. I know there's the whole devil sitting on your chest stories or sleep paralysis, but we can't share sleep paralysis, can we? So what the hell was this? This happened when I was around 12 or 13. My bedroom at my parents' house was in the basement, and because of occasional water problems in one corner, they basically painted the concrete and got me some nice area rugs for the spaces between furniture. My bed for a few years was basically one of the beds you get when you take bunk beds apart, so there was actually a lot of space underneath. I stored a bunch of stuff under the bed, but I left a gap between the stuff and the walls. The bed was in a corner, so that there would be airflow and things wouldn't start smelling musty. When we got a dog, one of the things she would sometimes do, since she was so small, was walk under my bed in that gap. It was a kind of tunnel to her. In the spring and fall, when the temperature differential in the house became quite significant, and the ground got big enough, we could sometimes get a bit of condensation on the bare concrete, and my dog would go under the bed and lick it up. We didn't want her licking condensation since it would be full of dust and other things that might be crawling under the bed. And one night I'm lying on my bed, pretty much just waiting to nod off, when I hear this licking under my bed. It sounds just like my dog is licking the concrete. And since she would usually walk into my room pretty quietly, I figured I must have missed her sneaking under the bed. I kind of hit the wall beside me a little, say her name, to get her to come out from under the bed, but she doesn't, and the licking sound continues. I try again more forcefully and nothing. Still this licking sound, and now I'm annoyed that she's being a brat, and I get down and kneel at the end of the bed. I should point out now that the licking sound is still there and still loud, so I know it's coming from under my bed. And now I'm yelling at my dog. And as I'm yelling, I hear the telltale sound of my dog jumping off my parents' bed, as their room is above mine, and hear her running down the stairs into mine. I stared at my dog and stared at my bed, and noped out of there. I ended up sleeping on the couch for about a week. It took me years to feel comfortable in that room again. This didn't happen to me but my wife. and I lived in the house right next to Dorothea Puente, the great American mass murderess. I was away one rainy night and my wife was alone in the house, and she woke up to ghosts of people coming out the closet in the living room and walking around the house, trying to be careful so as not to wake her. She was frozen in fear and couldn't do anything except hide under the covers. There were people buried all between the two houses. That place was really spooky. This happened about 4 to 5 years ago. I was staying over at my in-laws' house for the holidays. It was the middle of the night in my husband's childhood room when I woke up for some reason. I was laying on my left side when I simply opened my eyes without moving. I began to focus intensely on something on the top of the dresser, directly in my field of vision. I stared at it for what felt like an extended amount of time because I just couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. I never was able to figure out what I was looking at in that moment because of what happened next. But what I realized later is that it was some sort of glowing bust sculpture that was slowly shifting between different grotesque and monstrous faces. The glow was a dull brownish orange, and it cycled through probably 4 to 5 faces, such as angry horse and a dead-looking bald man. Before I could put this all together, a white blur passed by from the head of the bed down to the foot of the bed and then stopped. My gaze obviously followed this movement. Just past the end of the bed facing away was a woman, with long, dark, scraggly, curly hair. She was wearing an old-timey, frilly white nightgown with long sleeves, and I would guess her age was around 25 to 30. Her fists were down at her sides, tightly clenched, and her entire form was shaking with rage. Right when I felt like she was about to turn around to face me, I slammed my eyes shut and rolled over and clutched my husband. I did not move or open my eyes until it was clearly light out, and my husband began to stir. I don't think I slept at all from that point, and I was convinced something was going to grab me at any moment. I tried to think what might have happened in the house for a spirit like that to occupy it, but my in-laws built the house themselves about 20 years ago. They live in a remote part of a small western town, so perhaps something happened to that woman on the bare land many years before. In the end, I think I just experienced some sort of waking dream or latent hallucination, but that hasn't stopped me from dreading being in that room alone, or in the dark, or both. Oh, and by the way, in the light of the day, the top of the dresser was completely bare. I used to stay up pretty late working on the newspaper in high school. Our school has those motion detection light bulbs that automatically turn on whenever someone walks by a classroom. Pretty fun to run down a hall and watch the lights light up, but I digress. One night, I was getting a drink at the water fountain when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a light in a classroom at the end of the hallway turn on unexpectedly. I'm in one of the hallways, potentially on the floor, and I think, must be a malfunction. But just to soothe my mind, I decide to wait. The light in the next room turns on, and the next, and the next. Eventually I realize that something is turning on the lights and walking towards me. I freak out and book it back to the newspaper room. My friend and I were on duty that night, bringing on Doritos and playing music too loud. I tell him what's going on, and we go to check it out. The lights in the classroom at the end of the hallway are out, but the rest are lit. I think I knocked harder than I ever have in my life before. In the old house I lived in, I have 2 old wooden closets that were there when my family moved in. In our backyard there was also a mango tree, which seemed to have been there for decades. It was about a year after we moved in that the house became somewhat active. Our usual cleaning lady told us that when she was having her break, home alone, in the living room area, she heard people talking in the house. We weren't at the home at the time. And a few days later she informed us that she couldn't bear the encounter and thus moved out from the house, as it's common that the maids and cleaning people live on the same property where I live. About a week after that, we started finding kitten corpses around the property boundary. The location often appeared in the walls and corners and sometimes the rooftops. The most frequent finds would be around the mango tree in the corner of our backyard. These kittens just appeared. In our house on the second floor, the 2 closets are located in my room and the guest room, which became the storage room. Although these closets were old and the doors were a bit stiff, they don't seem to be broken nor dirty, so we kept them and cleaned the ones in my room to use. At the same time we started having the kitten crisis, I began to notice that the backside of the closest door had drawings which looked like kids' doodles. At the bottom part of the plank, I dismissed it thinking it was just carelessness while cleaning the closet, or someone had perhaps at some point brought their kids over to the house. But no. So I grabbed a wet towel to try and clean it, and it appeared to be just white chalk which came off with ease. But a few days later I went to grab something from the floor of the closet and found new chalk illustrations on the same area. I know for a fact that there weren't any guests that came to our house in the past few days after I cleaned the closet, and I'm the only child at 9 years old. Just about a week before we move out, the second closet started creaking. My mom decided to check it out, followed by a scream. Apparently, before my mum grabbed the closet handle, the door creaked open by itself, revealing a framed portrait of a lady in red staring back. We've checked those closets before and never used them. We were pretty sure we'd notice if there was a framed portrait sitting in one of them. On the day we moved out, the landlord told us that the lady in the portrait was the previous landlord of the property, who passed away many years ago. My sister passed away a few years ago. Growing up, we would always go to concerts together. She, being older than I am, would stand behind me and put her hands on my shoulders, I guess as a way to protect me, even though I was taller than her. We must have been to over 100 concerts together. A year after she passed, I went to a Red Hot Chili Peppers concert. It was the first time I'd been to one since her passing. I wasn't on the floor like my sister, and I usually got tickets for it, but in the seating section of the arena. My section was in the side of a stage, and my seat was at the end of the row. Midway through the concert, I felt hands on my shoulders, but no one was behind me. It was the only and most surreal thing I have ever experienced. A couple of years back, when I was still in high school, my family went for a trip to a little regional town called New Norcia in Western Australia. The town is famous for its bakery that is run by monks, but also its numerous ghost stories. Around the same time, going on this trip, I really got into Scariest Places on the Earth TV show, which is about a group of people who visit haunted places around the world, explaining the story of each place they visit and try to get an encounter with the paranormal. While we were having lunch at this place, I jokingly said to my brother that it reminds me of one of the locations from the Scariest Places, and to imagine if one of the ghosts here followed us home. Little did I know that I would be swallowing those words. The next day at home, we woke up to get a drink from the kitchen, and in the corner of my eye I see a shadowy figure moving towards our lounge room. When I looked directly at them, I saw what looked to be an indigenous girl making her way into our hallway. I busted into tears and ran up to my parents' room to wake my dad, and he just laughed and told me to grow up. The worst thing about it was that I was forced to go to a school retreat back to New Norcia 2 years later, and I had barely slept more than 4 hours for the 3 days that I'd ever spent there. I used to live on a chicken farm that had to be haunted. I swear a lot of strange things went on. Number 1. I was watching TV one night when I was 8. It was Batman, but that's irrelevant. I had my pair of shoes in the middle of the living room, and I was just sitting over there watching Batman when one of my shoes flips over. I was a good 7 feet away from it. That was the first phenomenon. Throughout the 6 years that we lived there, my family would be awoken at night every once in a while. We'd occasionally smell cigars, and there was no one smoking. There weren't even any cigars in the house. One night I even swore I could hear people playing a game of cards. In the middle of the tents barn, there is a generator room which controls the whole farm. There is also a phone that has its own number. One time at around 10 p.m. we get a call. The caller ID said it was the generator room. Now, whether this is a technological hiccup I don't know, but I put it off as unexplained. We moved out. The chicken farmhouse was built around 50 years ago. The house I'm living in now is around 60. My grandpa built it. Two things have happened here. Over the summer I took my dog outside from the back door, and you could see down the steps into the basement, and I left a light on. I looked down there and a shadow passed in front of my light. I didn't go down to turn it off. And about a year ago I was doing the laundry and I hear a metallic bang. It sounds like the dryer door slamming shut. Turns out it was open. Hadn't even moved. Just a few weeks ago, the boyfriend was asleep and I was lying next to him, trying to sleep. We sleep in the very room his father passed away in nearly 6 years ago. No weird circumstances surrounding his passing or anything. He simply wasn't in the best of health. The other night I'm trying to fall asleep and there's this weird tapping. It's not constant tapping, it's extremely irregular. It's kind of relaxing actually, like listening to a metronome. I sit up to look over in the direction it's coming from and say out loud, to no one in particular, "What's that mysterious tapping noise?" That's when it abruptly stopped, and I haven't heard it since. The next day I was asking my boyfriend if he heard it, and I described the sound. I guess it kind of sounded like Morse code, but when I asked, "What's the mysterious tapping noise?" it stopped. My boyfriend replied, "My dad knew Morse code." Yeah, it's not really that scary, but it's the scariest thing that's happened to me that I still to this day can't explain. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Jesse. I don't really remember much about him, but I remember my parents asking about him quite a lot and seeming quite concerned. Anyway, a few years ago while visiting relatives in Ireland, we were all exchanging ghost stories, and my family has a lot of creepy stuff happen to them. When my mum brought up Jesse, so I was obviously quite confused because I just thought he was an imaginary friend. Well, my mum started by saying how she didn't really understand why I called him Jesse, as I'd never heard that name before and she didn't know anyone who was called that, which I didn't think was too weird, it's just a name, right? Then she said that one time when my dad was on his way to work, he was an electrician in a mine at the time, I asked him to bring back coal for Jesse's gran. I was only about 2 or 3 at the time and wouldn't have understood what a mine was if I even knew he worked in one. Then at the end of her story, when we were on a day trip to a place we visited a lot when I was really young, I suddenly just ran off and they followed me into a graveyard. I ran straight to a small grave and stopped and stared at it. It was Jesse's grave. I felt quite creeped out that I spent a lot of time as a child playing with a ghost. Ever since I was really little, my family has always encountered really weird ghostly phenomena. The house we live in now has been by far the worst, with an almost constant stream of events happening. One of the stories that always freaks people out the most is that there was this little girl who knew our names and would approach us at different times. One night I was asleep and heard a knock on my door and a girl's voice saying, "Dean, open the door, let me in, I want to play. Open the door, Dean." At first I thought it was my sister, but as I woke up I realized it was a much younger girl's voice. I sat there silently freaking out until it eventually stopped, but just as I was about to go haul ass into my sister's room, there was a relentless pounding on the 2 separate doors that enter my room, and this little girl screaming with laughter saying, "I know you're in there. Let me in." After a few minutes I just ended up yelling, "Stop it!" And then the pounding stopped. The next morning, my mom and sister, who I hadn't told, were talking about strange footsteps and giggling sounds all through the house, but neither of them had heard any pounding or me yelling. I had this happen when my grandfather died in Mexico. We were having a wake for him, and it's customary to spend the night with the dead. I was around 15 when he died, and I didn't want to stay. The grief was too much for my sister and I. Also, I had a lot of little cousins who needed to be watched after. My sister and I walked down to my grandfather's home. He had a huge house, and it would get dark, so that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face at night. My sister and I arrive at his house, and everyone else is still at the wake. We're thinking my aunt and uncles will be dropping off our little cousins, as they had said that they would be doing that, but they never showed. They ended up staying at the wake with my little cousin, and my younger cousin, who had also taken my grandfather's death hard, was with my sister and I. We fell asleep in the same bed. At around 3 in the morning, I woke up feeling someone hugging me. It was a sensation I can clearly remember to this day. The warmth was so comforting, and the person felt like they were hugging the small of my back. I thought nothing of it, as my sister and cousin had been sharing the bed with me. When I awoke in the morning, I was the only one in bed. I got up to look for my sister and cousin. They were asleep, still in the bed adjacent to mine. When I asked them why they'd switched beds with me, it was then that the realization sunk in. I had wandered out of the bed in the middle of the night and made myself cozy in a bed that I slept in alone. Neither of my sister or cousin had been hugging onto me. They'd been snuggling next to each other the entire night. When I was somewhere between the ages of 10 to 12, I lived in a somewhat old house, and once in a while would experience things like hearing someone coming up the stairs but no one being around. Little things such as that I would just attribute to my imagination. Then one night, while I was asleep, I randomly woke up in the middle of the night and saw a young girl standing in the middle of my bedroom. It was dark in my room, so I couldn't make out any facial features, but I could see that she had long, light brown hair and was wearing a white nightgown. I thought it was my little sister. So I'm looking at this girl, and before I can really say or do anything, she says, "Help me." At this point, I still think it's my little sister, so I say, "Hold on, I can't see you." I then get out of bed, walk over to the light switch and turn on the light. I turn back round, but the girl is gone. I kind of stood there befuddled for a few minutes before climbing back into bed and going back to sleep. Looking back on it now, I have no idea how I was able to just get back to sleep like I did. I guess I really just didn't think too much of it at the time. To this day, I still debate whether what I experienced was real or just the result of being an imaginative, sleepy kid, but I never experienced anything to that degree before or since again. My mum's ex-boyfriend, who I didn't approve of and made it very clear with him, while alive anyway, haunted us for a while. I guess it's important to know that my mum and I were living with my dad again, as they decided to be on good terms as it was my last year of high school. She broke up with him because he wouldn't stop drinking, and after that, he was drunk driving and wrapped himself around a tree. Instant death. The next day I was getting ready for school. I'm sure I'm the only one home, and I hear the rocking chair in the nursery attached to my mum's room start to creak. I blow it off, thinking something fell off it. But after 20 or so minutes, and even when I was on the other side of the house, I could still clearly hear it. I told my friends about it when I got to school, and one of my buddies came to the house with me after we were done for the day. No one had been home since I left, and when we go into the nursery, the rocking chair has a stack of magazines on it, and none of them fell off. We ended up testing it out to get to the level of the sound I heard, and you had to be furiously rocking it back and forth on that chair just to achieve it. My buddy ended up leaving as soon as he left. I began hearing the doorknob in my mum's room turning non-stop. This continued until my dad got home, and being tired from work, he immediately went to take a nap. Only a few minutes after he went to sleep, it started back up until my mum got home. And I tried to explain to them what happened at dinner, but they didn't believe me, and this would continue for about 2 weeks. During this time, my mum got woken up to her alarm going off on her phone, and when she picked it up, It was unlocked on her ex's contact info. I woke up, and from what I thought was a lucid dream turned out to be real, as I felt hands make their way from my lower back up towards my upper chest and press down until I couldn't breathe. Finally they let up, and I immediately got up and began to run out my kitchen to get some water to calm down. The most insane thing was definitely invoking my mum and her friend's sister though. After the funeral, my mum went to his grave and placed some flowers, and when she got there she saw a big bouquet of flowers jammed in the ground. She thought it was weird and pulled them out and placed them in his grave neatly and didn't think anything of it. Then when she went to work the next day and told her friend about it, my mum swears to this day that her friend went white as a ghost, and her friend explained that she wasn't planning on telling her because it seemed insane. But when my mum, the friend and her sister, who could apparently see spirits, were at the funeral, the sister saw my mum's ex-boyfriend behind and said, "Tell my mum the flowers are for her." My first husband passed away in 2010, and he visited me a few times after his passing. I could feel him with me. He would talk to me through very specific songs on the radio, songs that held special meanings to the two of us that you didn't often hear on radio stations, songs that weren't regularly played on the radio at all. In the beginning, just after his death for several weeks, I would hear at least one of our songs a day. On days that I was having a harder time coping, I would hear more than one. They would begin to play completely out the blue when I was least expecting it. He would also visit my dreams. He revealed himself many times in different ways, and one night a few weeks after he passed, I went to bed and I felt him stronger than I had since his passing. I literally felt him lay down beside me in bed and wrap his arms around me. Some may think I'm delusional, but I know what I felt. I could feel warmth radiating through my body and breath on my neck, where he nestled close to me and held me until I dozed off. Once I fell asleep, I felt him release me and leave. I immediately awoke, startled and feeling empty, and thought maybe I dreamed it, but I could see the impression in the bed where he had been laying, and I could still feel the cooling sensation on my skin where his arms had been around me, and I was overwhelmed with emotion. I continued to feel him with me for a while after that, but never next to me, or laying with me or holding me as he had that night. The last time I felt his presence extremely strong, I went to his grave. As I pulled under the archway at the entrance of the cemetery, He Stopped Loving Her Today by George Jones began to play on the radio. That song had been playing at his granddad's funeral 2 years prior, and on our drive home from the service, we had a conversation about that song and why it played. When it began to play, as I sat under the archway, I felt something release inside of me. In my heart, I knew he was telling me that he was okay, and that it was time for him to move on. I still often think about him, and the way he would reveal himself to me, but none of those times were as prevalent, as real, as the night my husband held me, for the last time. I live in England, and I've always thought ghosts and stuff might be real, but now I have no doubt about it. I get home from school about 2:40, and everyone else gets home about 3:30. I walk in through the front door, which is in the kitchen. My mum's room is above the kitchen, and this is where I hear it. So I walk in, lock the door, and grab a drink. And then I hear sounds from the bottom of the stairs, which sounds like someone is running, that goes all the way into my mum's room and stops. I grab a huge knife out the drawers and go up the stairs to see if anyone's there. To be honest, I think I preferred to know if someone was actually there, but those footsteps were so heavy. So imagine heavy footsteps running. I was absolutely terrified. Stay away, ghosts, and stop running around my house. When I was a kid, around 8 years old, I lived in California for a little while. And the school I went to was full of rude and mean little kids. Never had a friend there. One day my mum was working and she asked the babysitter to pick me up from school, but I guess she forgot and eventually I was alone in school, since my mum always told me never to walk out alone. I was alone for about an hour just reading my book when out of nowhere an African American kid about my age that I'd never seen at the school before comes up to me and started talking. I was super shy and still am, but for some reason really felt at ease and started speaking with him like he was my best friend. We began playing hide and seek, tag, hopscotch, and he gave me candy. I remember putting my wrapper in the bag while he left his on the floor. About 30 minutes later, I heard my mum frantically yelling my name, and I came out happy to tell her about my new friend. I tell her that another kid was forgotten too, and she told me to go get him since we could take him home, and I ran to look for him. But he was nowhere to be found. I looked where we were sitting and eating candy, and his wrapper that he had left was gone. It was like he was never there. I go back and tell my mum, and she looked at me not knowing what to do, but eventually we get home. When we do arrive, I open my bag to take my homework out, and I realize the candy wrapper that I had put in there was gone. I know I didn't imagine any of it, because he had braided my hair and I still had the braid. I still don't know who or what I met that day, but I would like to meet them again. Do you think it was my guardian angel? About a year ago, I was laying in bed after having just finished reading World War Z. Excellent zombie novel. It was in the middle of winter and slightly after midnight. I couldn't sleep as my mind was still crawling with zombies, so I lay awake staring at the ceiling with the dog snoring away next to me. Suddenly I heard 3 loud thumps from the glass of the window across the room, very hard and very steady, like someone pounding on the glass with the flat of their hand. The sound scares the hell out of me and awoke the dog, who started barking. I sat there trying to reassure him and myself that it was okay, and there was some sensible reason for it. After a few minutes we both calmed down. He went back to sleep and I followed about half an hour later. I was woken up in the middle of the night by the same sound. The sound came from the same window, with the same steady interval between thumps, and just as loud as before the dog woke and started barking again. Both of us were freaking out, and I couldn't bring myself to turn on the light and go look out the window. The only thing I could think to do was to run out into the living room, curl up on the couch with the dog and put a blanket over both our heads. The next morning I woke up on the couch feeling exhausted, having slept only intermittently. The dog was sitting at the door to my room, looking alert and looking back at me, whining. I went back into my room and looked out the window. There was nothing unusual looking, no marks on the glass or anything. My apartment is on the top story of a 6th-floor building. The fire escape was on the window nearest to the bed, not the one near the window where the sound came from. Whatever had hit the window had been a 6-story drop beneath it. At a loss for any other explanation, I figure it must have been a bird running into the window. I had no explanation for the fact that it seemed to do so 3 times in a row, at a very steady pace, steady intervals on 2 separate occasions, and with a sound much louder than can be made by a lightweight creature bouncing off glass. The fact that it happened late at night, at a time when birds aren't typically flying around. I also carefully ignored in my hope for some sane explanation. Somewhat satisfied with my realization, I went to work and felt much better for the rest of the day. That is until one last fact filtered into my mind. It dwelt there for the rest of the workday, nagging at me, and when I rushed home to confirm my suspicions, reaching the window again just as the sun was setting, I saw my troublesome suspicion was accurate. There was a screen on the outside of the window. The noise had very clearly been the sound of the glass being struck. Whatever had hit the window had to have done it from the inside of the room. I've always had a spirit, or many of them following me, I suppose. I once had a very scary spirit here with me that kept scaring me until I told it to go away about a month or 2 ago. And during those few weeks I felt calm and could go to the toilet in the middle of the night and even just sleep without having a feeling of being scared. But a week ago I started having the feeling again, and random knocks under my bed, and someone always making my mirror doors dirty with handmade drawings. I have my whole other wall made out of mirror doors, and my little 3-year-old sister kept lying next to my bed and looking down and giggling. She then started talking about a boy who lives under my bed. 3 days ago, I saw the boy. I was coming out of our bathroom, and a very young boy of about 6 walked past me without looking at me. He looked very anxious, sad, and genuinely lost. I was talking to my girlfriend about him, and she told me to try and communicate with him, so I did. I told him 1 noise means yes and 2 means no, and started asking questions. Answers I got summed up here. He's 6 years old, lives under my bed, and is afraid of the other spirits in my house, and that's why he hides under the bed. He also told me that there has been a spirit that has left when I asked her to. So I have seen the ghost boy under my bed, and I'm pretty scared, although he told me that he is kind but afraid. I think he is even more scared than I am. I sometimes talk to him about stuff, and once left my sister's ball for him to play with. Maybe he'll one day be able to move on to some place where he doesn't need to be afraid. On April 7th of 2019, when I was 15, my father had an asthma attack and was in the ICU in a coma for 9 days. He passed away on April 16th. My father was my best friend, and he was not just a father, he was my dad. We went everywhere together, malls, shopping, arcades, Walmart at 3 a.m, laser tag, just driving around and listening to rock, and he did whatever he could to help me, since he knew I suffered with severe depression and other mental illnesses, so he did whatever he could to distract me. In January 2020, I started dating a guy that truly cares for me, and we got close quick. One day in March, me and my boyfriend spent the whole day together. During this day, we're bored, and his mum offered to take us to the mall. So I got in my boyfriend's mum's car, the passenger side, but sit so that I could reach up my hand and hold my boyfriend's hand, because I get really weird in car rides, because I'm not really used to it, and put my headphones in because she usually listens to Spanish music in the car and doesn't really talk while driving unless my mum is with her. We start to drive and everything felt normal until we get onto the highway towards what was me and my dad's favourite mall. We'd go there at least twice a week. I looked ahead and all I could see is my boyfriend's long dark hair and the road ahead. My playlist was on shuffle, and through my earbuds my dad's favourite song started to play, Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. I looked out the passenger side window and just looked at the highway, and I knew so well. Listening to the song, I thought I heard my dad's voice so naturally. I looked at the driver's side of the back seat and saw my dad playing air guitar. I rubbed my eyes, figuring it was my sleepy brain since I hadn't slept much the night before. We got to the mall, and my boyfriend and I were walking around, going through the mall, holding his hand really tight, and I looked towards the store that me and my dad would always spend the most time in, Hot Topic, and I thought I saw my dad again. This time he was just standing there smiling. That smile that he gave whenever he could. I was just really happy when he mouthed the words, "See you later, buddy," which was also the last thing he said before the asthma attack. I'm a big believer in the paranormal and grew up in a believing society. In fact, if you are gifted, the community encourages you to pursue your paranormal strength further. Needless to say, I've seen some weird stuff in my lifetime, but the scariest has got to be that I saw a white sheet wrapped around a body, which is a typical way of burying the dead in Islam, sitting on my balcony. As I went up to grab a hand towel, you can see his face, and it's just staring ahead. I still remember all the details and everything. I stared at him for a few moments and everything suddenly turned into slow motion and it was really quiet. I then slowly turned around and ran downstairs and cried. I later learned that it is believed that you are able to see this body, and that means they are being pushed in hell. Apparently if you stay and watch for a while, they will eventually stand up really quick, fall back and disappear. As far as the story goes anyway. About 9 years ago, when the paranormal activity in our home was at a peak, my brother enjoyed something he called ghost hunting. He would hang out in the unfinished section of the basement with both connecting doors closed and the lights off. He would bring random items and speak to whatever was back there in an attempt to experience something. I was too nervous to join him, but one time I did. What happened that day resulted in neither of us stepping foot in there again, and put an abrupt end to his game. It was in the middle of the day, and the sunlight was still coming through the 2 tiny windows. We had positioned ourselves in the center of the room, and he began asking questions. I was standing in front of my brother looking around nervously. For some reason I got incredibly silent, and began to feel very uncomfortable. So I turned around but realized he was not behind me anymore. Confused, I called out his name several times and started searching, but he was nowhere to be seen. I hadn't heard him leave, nor had I heard the door open nor close. The light in the basement had changed, and it was strange. Every dust particle was frozen in the air, as if time itself had paused. Seriously freaked out, I squatted down on the concrete floor and just rocked back and forth. I felt like I had been crouched for hours, when suddenly I felt someone touch my shoulder, and when I spun around it was my brother. He looked very confused and asked what I was doing. I explained what happened and he just said, "What do you mean? I've been here the whole time." Whatever we contacted that day was able to separate us somehow. It still spooks us, and I'll never know what really happened. When I was young, my mum and I moved into an apartment. About 3 to 4 nights a week I would hear noises from the kitchen. It sounded like drawers opening and closing and cutlery being rattled about. I would stand at the threshold of the kitchen where the carpet met linoleum and tried to see what was happening, until I'd inevitably get freaked out enough to wake up my mum and tell her someone was stealing our knives and forks. She would of course tell me to go back to bed. By the time we moved, we had no spoons left. People who spent the night on the couch reported seeing shadowy movement from the corner of their eyes. My mum never noticed anything odd. As an adult, I make my living as a theatre artist. Throughout my childhood, I was involved in many community theatres, and there is one superstition about the theatre world that is absolutely true. There is not a real theatre without a ghost or two hanging about. The ghost at this community theatre in my hometown was lovingly referred to as Troy. He was a friend of the owner's who painted many sets for the company before passing away from a chronic illness. The owner said that he still hung about, and I, fully believing in the paranormal from a young age, didn't question it. In fact, I would sometimes sit in this stairwell before shows and talk to Troy, and would ask him how he was doing and thank him for watching over the theatre and his friends. Nothing ever came from those moments, really. It was just something I would do to get the jitters out before a show. Fast forward a short time later, when I was asked to help run the sound for a play. I got to work to set up in the TEP booth, which felt super cool. It was just me and the lighting guy up there alone. So, there's a night where I mess up a sound cue, and I'm scrambling around with the buttons trying to fix my mistake. I suffer a lot of anxiety, and tiny mistakes tend to sit with me for hours or even days. As I'm freaking out and feel the panic start to rise in my chest, I feel a hand on my left shoulder. It's firm and comforting and brings me back to earth. I turn around to see the sound guy on my right, thinking it's him, but both hands are firmly on his computer. Once I see it's not him, the pressure on my shoulder releases and a cool breeze floats by. After a beat, I whispered into the darkness next to me, "Thank you, Troy." It was the first and only time I've ever felt physical contact from the paranormal, and it was so nice. It honestly calmed me down and made me feel better. I felt like I built a relationship with this ghost, and by doing that he was able to help me in my time of need. Just goes to show not all paranormal connections need to be scary. That theatre no longer exists, and every once in a while I think of Troy and wonder if he was able to move on. Ever since I was young, I've had encounters with the dead. I'm now in my mid-20s. I've At first, it wasn't that scary, but as I got older, it became more normal. I haven't ever had anything malignant try to hurt me, from the other side, fortunately. But I've had dozens of encounters with the paranormal, from seeing them, hearing them, and even feeling them. But I experienced something yesterday I'd never felt before. It started with hearing a male voice downstairs in my living room, which for me isn't weird. I hear them often. I was the only one home at the time, and it was the voice of a young man, having a two-sided conversation, but I only heard him. He said things like, "Do they know? What should I do? I'm scared." Upon investigating, there was nothing there. About a half hour later, things became even more strange. I was in my dining room, which is where the doors to my basement are. My basement is an unfinished dirt floor room that no one hangs out in. It was quiet in the house except for my son playing with his cars in the living room, until I heard drum beats, faint at first and then growing louder with the sound of Native American chanting. It sounded like it was coming from underneath me, so I opened the basement door and the sound grew immensely. It was coming from the darkness in my basement. I flicked the light on it and it stopped. Has anyone ever had encounters with Native American spirits? This is the first time I believe I've ever dealt with anything like this. When I was in 5th grade, we moved to the house we currently live in. The house I lived in up until that point was not haunted that I can recall, but I did experience ghostly activity in the houses of my friends. When we moved into our new house, things started happening immediately. During the tour of our property, it became clear to us that our neighbors had sold the house and moved next door for some reason. They wanted to be near their old home but could not stay in it anymore. Keep in mind my parents didn't believe in spirits, which will be important later. Shortly after moving in, something clearly wanted to grab my attention. I was drawing in my room alone one afternoon and needed water, so I pushed the box of colored pencils to the back of the dresser so that they wouldn't fall, and left the room. As soon as I walked back in, I watched in shock as the box of colored pencils slid across the top of the dresser and slowed down as it reached the edge. Suddenly the box flew off and landed on the floor, sending colored pencils flying everywhere. I screamed because I was afraid and confused. My dad came running, but he didn't believe me when I explained what I had seen through blurs of tears. There was no open window or fan on, and my floor was not slanted, which could have offered the only alternate explanation as to why these things fell over. Back in college, I lived in a studio apartment after moving out of dorms. My childhood home was haunted. Whenever I go to a new place, I can usually feel if the energy is off, but it took a while to figure out my apartment. I think something either followed me there or an entity, a new spirit, is residing in the studio. Most of the time I felt totally comfortable, but there are things that happened that I can only describe as paranormal. Like for example, one time in the middle of the night, a bunch of dishes fell over the counter in the kitchen, and the huge crash woke up my significant other and I from a deep sleep. When I went to investigate, one of the cups was rotating on the tile. I watched it spin for a solid minute before picking it up. Another time, something yanked the lamp off the bedside table during the night so hard, it shattered beyond repair. There was also the occasion that a voice interrupted a phone call when I was there alone. It was a hushed whisper that said, "I'm right behind you." I checked everywhere but found nothing. The bathroom scared us at night. Something about it made us, well, mostly me, uncomfortable, to the point where I refused to go in alone or without a light on. There wasn't a door, so I had to stare at a pitch-black rectangle, not knowing what I might see. Once I was showering at night and I heard small footsteps like a child running barefoot across the tile towards the tub. The candle I had lit flickered like there was a gust of wind, so I said, "Hello?" Immediately afterwards, the footsteps ran out the bathroom. I was there by myself, and the door was locked. I tried looking up the history of the building, but found nothing. About a year ago, me and some friends went to a cave by one of their houses. We were in there for a solid 20 minutes before we hit the back of the cave and nothing was happening. I started to look about the cave with my flashlight and saw a small crawl space and pointed out to it. We went in and saw nothing, but the entire area was smooth, dirt-like, as if it were man-made. When we left the crawl space, we decided to use a voice recorder to try and speak to ghosts. When we asked, we heard nothing, until we listened to the recording and heard the voice of an old smoker, and it basically said, "Go now. Leave." Completely disregarding our question. We took its advice and started to leave, and we had a rock thrown at us, and I turned around to see a dark shadow about 8 feet tall with dim red eyes. So I just wanted to write this, so that everyone knows he's here. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I otherwise don't know how else to explain what happened, and I'm sure there are plenty of skeptics, or otherwise maybe I just can't make sense of it. I was lying in bed, my girlfriend in the bathroom, and I thought I saw her awkwardly walk by the door to the bedroom, so I look up to see what's going on. I was surprised to see that it was not in fact my girlfriend, but an otherwise unknown man with shoulder-length hair. Now, just to clarify, it's 30 minutes to midnight, which isn't very late, but late enough that I can't think of any reason there would be an unknown visitor, let alone someone who I can't recognize. So here I am looking up at this strange man, who I can remember his facial features, but none of his other features, be it its height, clothes, or anything else, although I can certainly remember him having a body. As I was looking at him, he slowly turned his head to look at me in the eye and walked away without breaking eye contact. It's worth mentioning that I've dealt with a home intruder in the past, and know that my flight reflex kicked into full force, but in this instance I was strangely calm, because I had just seen someone walk through my whole house, and of course had to check to make sure everything was okay and safe. So I walked around where he went, which only led to a closet that has boxes in the way, so is inaccessible, or a spare room upstairs with no other exits. And if I did happen to see the direction he walked, the only other possible option was that it walked into a locked bathroom that my girlfriend was in. After walking into the room to check what was going on, there was nothing out of the ordinary, except for the fact the room was noticeably colder, and every other room in the general vicinity. I checked other possible hiding places, but nothing. Other than that, after a minute or so, I heard my girlfriend finish up and walk in to find me, confused, looking through an otherwise empty room. It might be worth mentioning I shortly after messaged a friend about what happened, and all my messages were sending delayed or out of order. But I feel as that was just network error. Does anyone have any explanation for what I witnessed? Because, if not, I'm fairly convinced it's a ghost. I'm a 17-year-old female, and this happened to me when I was around 10. I live in New Zealand, not exactly a country booming with ghost tales or anything of that sort, so any ideas on what I experienced would be appreciated. It was 7:30 a.m., Saturday morning, when I woke up with an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. I stumbled out of bed as per normal, about to make my way to the kitchen when I noticed my left leg was tingling, like pins and needles. Figuring I slept funny on it, I tried to walk it off. For context, my house is 2 stories high, my bedroom being on the 2nd floor, with the kitchen and dining room being the first thing you see when you get to the bottom of the stairs. As I started hobbling towards the staircase, with a half-asleep foot, I felt something lightly grab my ankle and slowly lift my leg up a little. Before pulling it towards my bedroom, I had a complete lack of control over my whole leg due to its numbness. At one point, my leg was pulled so far from my body that I had to hop towards my room on my stable foot to keep it balanced. I kept looking behind me through the whole encounter, if you can call it that, and I didn't see anything. My heart beat faster and faster in my ears as an invisible force seemingly pulled me back. I never screamed once. I think I was too shocked to squeak out a word. This whole thing lasted maybe 10 seconds before whatever it was let go, and the house floorboards settled. All the feeling in my leg returned immediately. I just stood outside my bedroom door for another minute, my brain not really comprehending what happened. I never told my family what I experienced out of fear of being laughed at, and I have had a few other unexplainable things happen, but this is by far the creepiest. This story goes back about 10 years ago. I was 15 at the time, and my mother had a best friend called Frankie. Frankie had only one child, a son, who quickly became a brother figure to me, Jack. I'd met him when I was about 10, and he had been 14. He wasn't that much older than me, and one weekend I slept over their brand new townhouse with my mum. If you're not familiar with the concept, a townhouse-style apartment is where people live on either side of you, but not above you. This will become important later. I slept over with him and his ex-girlfriend Anna. We'd been exchanging ghost stories at their kitchen table, which was on the second floor. They had a small basement room and bathroom below that was attached to the garage, and then upstairs were 2 bedrooms and another bathroom. I was in the middle of telling a story when we heard walking upstairs. We were the only ones home, so the noise had stopped us all dead in our tracks. They were clear and consistent. I was shocked and frozen. That's when they started telling me about the Shadow Man. Anna went into describing how one night she saw the Shadow Man on the stairs. She'd seen him come down when she'd woken up from falling asleep on the couch. She could almost feel him brush past her. Her and Jack had nightmares that a man would come into their room, which was narrow and long, and attack them, and try to draw them out with children's toys. They found baby shoes and broken toys scattered strangely around their crawl space when they'd moved in. The whole 9. They told me in detail. That is when everything started to go down. After the footsteps died off, we went up to their room to watch TV and chill. They had a huge square window above their bed. My back was to it, and I was facing the door. Anna was on my left, Jack was on my right, and I continued my story, and they were both in awe, especially Anna, who was zoned in on me the whole time I spoke. Suddenly, out of the corner of our eyes, Jack and I saw a huge, dense, black shadow zoom overhead and dart into the vent above Jack. I'd stopped telling my story again instantly. Jack and I reacted at the time, so we knew we hadn't made it up. Anna had crap peripheral vision and hadn't seen it, but the second we started explaining it, I felt this deep, intense, burning feeling on my right shoulder. And I kid you not, I felt like I'd been burnt with a cigar. I yelped and threw myself forward in pain, and Anna immediately checked my back. Lo and behold, there was a huge burn mark about the diameter of a cigar. What was sad was I don't want any evidence of it. She was going to take a photo and tell our parents, but I had experienced years of not being believed, and I was scared they'd think that it was some kind of prank or way to get attention, or they'd just write it off. God, do I regret not taking that picture. I'm 21 and have experienced paranormal encounters at my parents' house ever since I was in middle school. The scariest of all is when I saw something after waking up from a nightmare. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I was able to sit up in bed and was still able to stare at me, red eyes and all. It was sitting on the wall above my TV. I moved out of my house last year with some friends. A few days ago, we started renting a new house. Along the process, I spent the night at my parents' house for the first time in a while. I slept on the couch with my dog just a few feet away from me. I woke up to myself sleep-talking, and I was just saying, Jesus Christ, over and over again. I was having a nightmare about a demon, and ever since I was a kid, any time I feel scared, I would just say Jesus Christ to get any possible dark entities away from me. My dog realized I was having a nightmare and woke me up, and I kept saying Jesus Christ until I was fully awake. Then I turned and saw a large figure walking into the downstairs hallway. This was at 4 a.m, and I just figured that my parents or little sister came down to use the bathroom. The next day I asked my family members if they had come all the way downstairs at 4 a.m, and everyone said no. My dad said that he did hear me saying Jesus Christ over and over again a few times, and knew that I was sleep-talking. My main point in question is what walked past me after I woke up from my nightmare. Could it have been something protecting me, or the dark entity haunting me? Something really weird happened to me last night. Before I start, I would just like to clarify that it is most likely not a ghost, but there seems to be some strange coincidences associated with this encounter. Last night I threw on a movie called Cabin 28. I believe it's the name, apparently based off an actual unsolved murder that occurred in a cabin, where these people are ambushed by a group of people wearing masks. Anyway, when I turned the movie on, I was thinking about whether or not watching horror movies like this can lead to manifesting negative things. I get scared easily when watching horror movies alone, and I had wondered to myself if watching scary movies was a good idea, in case that fear can manifest itself in reality. So I continued watching the movie. While the movie was playing, I had become distracted by my phone, and decided to throw on some music to clear my mind. So I threw my AirPods in and walked into my kitchen area and saw someone walk past my house on the sidewalk out the front door. Mind you, almost every light source in my house are off except for the TV in the living room. When I saw the person walk by, I had taken a mental note of how you don't really see many people walking around this late at night, but I quickly dismissed the thought and turned around while listening to music to look back towards the back end of the house. After a few moments, I saw someone pop up beside my kitchen side door. Immediately, I became extremely frightened and walked up to the door to stare this person down. I can vividly remember the muscles on my face tensing up, feeling a rush of adrenaline and emotions due to the surprise and thought of someone trying to break into my home. I raised my finger and pointed at them, but couldn't gather the courage to say anything. They had raised their hand to knock, but didn't get a chance before they realized I was standing in the doorway. Our motion sensor lights had turned on, and I saw someone who was probably in their mid-20s around my age, and they were wearing a hat, jacket, and a black mask. They removed the mask to tell me, "I think this is the wrong house," and proceeded to turn around and walk away around my neighbor's house only to vanish. When I tried to look for them out the front windows, I couldn't find them at all when looking down the street. The creepy thing about this whole scenario is that when I looked at the clock, the time was 3:33 a.m., which, to my understanding, is halfway through the witching hour, as well as the series of numbers and particular time holds some spiritual significance. This whole thing creeped me out because 1, it's possible that it's a person and they could have been telling the truth. 2, they were either casing my home and considering breaking in to rob it, or 3, due to the coincidence of the time and the bizarreness of the whole situation, perhaps there was something paranormal taking place. It's a pretty well agreed upon fact in my household that we are living in the presence of spirits. There have been a few encounters that my mum and sister have told me about, and I've had a few myself, but the one that stands out to me the most was when I asked my sister what kind of demon she was keeping in her room, because there was a creaking coming from there, and the door would sometimes close and open slightly. Though, at the time, I put this down to wind, despite the fact no windows were open. My sister replies, "Oh, that's only Jeremy." So what do? I call out to joke with myself to try and ease my anxiety. "Is that you, Jeremy?" And then it stops. The creaking, the door, they both stop as soon as I say that. Scared me real good. I was staying with a friend of mine when this happened. It was around 1:30 a.m. She was already asleep, but I was wide awake. I was just playing games on my phone or something when the closed door starts to creak open. This door was click-closed completely, so it couldn't have been the wind. I thought it was my friend's mum coming to check on us for the night. I call out her name but got no reply. Then I saw it. This dark shadow figure crawls into the room on all fours, low to the ground, almost like it was slithering. Then it stands. It was a tall man, completely black in the darkness of the room. It had no face, but I could feel when we made eye contact. We stared at each other for a moment, then it vanished, completely gone. I freaked the hell out for a minute. I mean, I've had spirit encounters before this, and it's not the first ghost I've seen, but it was definitely the most upfront experience I've ever had. The feelings I got when this happened were not good. The spirit had a darkness to it. This guy was not good to have around. Once I calmed down, I got up and turned on the hall light. I thought about getting my friend's mom, as she is spiritual like me, but figured it would be better to address it in the morning. I got back to bed with my friend and fell asleep. People have told me that they would never have been able to get up after that, or that I'd die first in a horror movie. But I honestly didn't feel like I was in danger. I knew that the spirit was gone. I felt it. In the morning, my friend's mum and I went through the house with Palo Santo wood, cleansing the house and banishing the spirit. Then I made some witch's salt and lined all the exits and entrances to the house. I think my experience really freaked her out, because now she does a daily cleanse of the house, once in the morning and once at night. My friend, her mum and I have all been to see a psychic since and discovered some things about what happened. Apparently the spirit was attached to my friend and was feeding off her negative energy, as she's had a hard time lately, and the spirit was surprised that I could see it. The medium said that we did the right thing without banishment, and that if it ever comes back, to call her. So that's definitely the scariest ghost story I've ever had. Me and my wife separated around 5 months ago. I rented a home back in the town where I grew up. After moving in, immediately strange things started happening. Please keep in mind this is a very old farmhouse, like skeleton keyholes on all the doors. First, it was just the random noises, taps and creaks. Then my bedroom door opened randomly. 3 people have witnessed it. And then we started hearing what sounds like footsteps at night. Again, very old house, so I didn't think much of it. Me and the kids started joking around, saying things like, "Oh, the ghost is messing around in the hall again." Or we'll hear something and someone would say, "Ah, it's just the spirit." The more we acknowledged that we knew something was up, the worse it became. I have awoken to what sounds like someone beating on the back door 3 times. I have a piece of art in my living room that's made of wood and weighs at least 3 to 4 pounds. It was hung up with 2 screws supported very well, and when I was asleep it flew across my living room and scared me to death. One night, my son went to take a shower, and I was in the garage and I heard him scream. I ran as fast as I could to him, and he was in the fetal position, balled up on the bottom of the shower crying. My son is 11, doesn't scare easily, and all of my kids started on horror movies young. He does most of the pranks and scaring around the house, and yet he still will not discuss the reason behind the incident, just that he felt scared all of a sudden. I know exactly what he means. I only sleep in the master bedroom when there's someone else home. I can't explain it, but I just have a strange feeling in there. After the scare of my son, it's an everyday reminder that no one wants to use the bathroom with the door open. There's another bathroom incident. I was taking a shower after work, the kids were with their mums for the week, and I was about to get out the shower and a huge crash against the wall scared the hell out of me. I get out very suspiciously, creep out the bathroom, and a bulk container of soap, the big refill ones, had hit the outside of the shower wall hard enough to smash the plastic top into itself by at least 3 inches. The bottle was on a pantry shelf 10 feet away, and it would have taken a full-grown person to throw it hard enough for it to crush. I've purchased 5 cameras to go around my home to try and capture something, but the cameras activate too late. All I've managed to capture is me getting up and running around the house in my underwear trying to find out what's making the noise. The kids stayed with my ex-grandmother-in-law 1 weekend ago, and apparently they mentioned what was going on. Her and I don't see eye to eye and speak even less. When she brought the kids home, she came in without saying much. She hung up a cross, blew some sage and left. Things have calmed down except for the random noises here and there. People might say I'm crazy, but I really don't want things to start back up again. Back in the early 90s, my boyfriend arrived home from school early one day, for some odd reason. Without being overly observant, he goes into his room in the dark. It's a quiet house, and he grabs the phone to call his friend Frank. He hears his mum on the line talking to one of her other nurse friends about a patient. He hangs up the phone and waits a while, but curiously looks into the driveway and doesn't see his mother's car. He then searches the house calling her name, but no mum. A few hours later, her car pulls into the driveway and he asks her if she came home for a minute that day. She hadn't. He then recounts the phone conversation, and she claimed that she had had the exact conversation earlier from work 2 towns away with another nurse who was also at work. Their home phone was in no way associated with the phones at the hospital. One winter break when I was home from college visiting family, something strange happened. For some perspective, after I moved out, my parents relocated my room into the guest bedroom in the basement. After all the experiences in our house, my brother and I came to the conclusion that the basement was the source of it all. I know it's cliché to say that it's spooky, creepy, and uncomfortable down there. However, there is no way to fully explain how unsettling it can be. My bedroom is in the finished area, so I feel a little more comfortable since there are walls and doors separating me from the unfinished part. One night I was sitting in bed on my phone as usual. It was late, around midnight if I remember rightly. I was just relaxing when all of a sudden my bedroom door creaked open about a foot. We have cats, so I thought one had pushed it open, but when I looked I saw nothing. Then a woman's voice said softly, "Time for bed," and closed my door as someone pulled it shut. I thought it was odd as I was old enough that my parents hadn't checked on me at bedtime in years. In the morning, I asked my mum if she had come down to tell me to go to bed, and she had no clue what I was talking about. To this day, I'm still not sure who or what it was. A ghost was either mimicking my mother's voice, or it was something else entirely. I also have another story. When I was sitting in school, I had gotten home from class early and decided to call my brother. I had time to kill before my boyfriend got home from his classes, and I wanted something to do. My brother and I talked over the phone for a long time, easily 45 minutes. It was mostly the usual things mixed with random stories and sibling inside jokes. We were laughing and having fun when suddenly I heard another voice in the background. It sounded like a loud whisper. It said, "I'm right behind you." It was very fast, but I knew I heard it. It was almost mocking. And I'm feeling sick even recounting this. I stopped my brother to ask if he'd heard it too. He had. He was hoping it was nothing, but at this point we were both scared out our wits. I checked my entire apartment, even the shower, but there was no one there. I asked my brother to check, as he was back home. He said he was sitting in the basement by himself. It freaked both of us out, and for the next week, I felt like someone was watching me. I hate even remembering this, because I don't know what it was or how it was able to join the call. It's incredibly freaky to think it may have been a demon, and I'm really hoping it was just a playful poltergeist that wanted to scare someone. If it was, it did a good job. I used to live with my in-laws, and things were always weird around there to begin with. One thing that really stood out was the day my son was having a tantrum. He was maybe 1 and refusing to eat his lunch. My then fiancé, now husband, and I were very stressed and tired, considering we worked on 3rd shift at the time. And after our son finally calmed down, the 3 of us were relaxing in the living room, and clear as day we all heard a male voice say, "Harder than you thought it would be, isn't it?" There was no one else in the room, and my fiancé and I looked at each other in confusion while our son looked around the room as if searching for the source of the voice. He would often be found in his room talking or giggling to himself, or staring at certain spots on the walls too. For a while, he kept talking about someone called Timmy. Another time, we were out for most of the night at some friends playing D&D, because we're nerds, and we came home and relaxed in our room for about an hour before we had to get our son up, as he stayed with his grandparents. My husband was on his phone, and I was just relaxing, and suddenly I heard someone whisper my name loudly in my ear. I even at first felt my hair move, making me jump. I have heard my name being called a few times, as well as while living there. After my mother-in-law passed away in the house, the activity seemed to increase. I remember one time I was doing dishes and felt someone behind me, looking over my shoulder. Of course, when I looked, no one was there. This happened many times. On another occasion, my father-in-law and his new girlfriend went outside, and they always close the door so the dogs can't be in their room unsupervised. No sooner had they left the house, the door slowly swung open once more. All the dogs were present and accounted for in the living room, and pressure from the front door had never affected their bedroom door before or since. One of the strangest things that happened to me in the house was this final story. My husband and I always sleep with the door closed. But one night I awoke to find the door cracked and what appeared to be a face peeking in. At first I thought it was my father-in-law, but then I realized he wouldn't just open the door. He always knocked first and would leave if there was no answer. I thought at first it could be my son, but the face was too high up to be a child. He was probably around 3 at the time. The scariest thing was that I felt completely naked and exposed at that moment, like this thing could see right through me, even though I was covered by a blanket. I lay completely still and just stared at it until I fell back asleep, afraid that if I even made the slightest movement it would know I was awake. And then what? When I woke up again in the morning, the door was closed and everything was back to normal. There were more experiences, but those are the ones that stand out to me the most. We have since moved, and all seems well in our new home. In August of 2017, I was excited to buy a small house in Penetanguishene, Ontario. I had a good friend of mine move in to help with some bills throughout the rest of 2017. We only had a few cupboards in the kitchen open that we played off as something else, not really believing in the paranormal. 2018 rolls around. Throughout the beginning of the year is when things really became active. The slamming of kitchen cupboards, closing a door we never use, turning on the stove and leaving claw marks on my thigh at one point. I was able to watch what I thought was my roommate walk from the kitchen to his bedroom, but he was still in the basement on his computer. In June of 2018, my roommate decides to move in with his girlfriend, so I thought it was time for mine to move in with me. She was obviously skeptical at first. In November, we found out we were having a baby. Over 9 months of pregnancy, there's next to no activity, just cupboards left open again. In August of 2019, our baby is born, and the second we walk through the front door, we hear the baby's room door slam shut with incredible force. All through the first year of life, there was all kind of activity. We could hear voices through the sound machine, which shouldn't be possible. Constant slamming of things. Every picture we'd hung up had been taken off the wall. Lights flickering and showers turning off by themselves, you name it. It got so bad at one point we even considered bringing in a priest, even though we're not religious. I decided to share this because just this morning, not an hour ago, when my alarm went off and I was still dozy, it was at the foot of my bed, and I saw something come down hard on the bed, like it slammed its hand on it. Should I be scared for my baby's well-being? Should I try and expel the ghost somehow? What do I do? My father used to come home late, around midnight, from company hangouts or while being with friends. I would always come into his bedroom and lie next to him when he was asleep. Sometimes we'd watch movies together. My mum works overseas and the only people that took care of me were my father and full-time nanny. Long story short, I wake up around the same time as always, 12 to 2 a.m. and head over to my father's bedroom. My nanny was asleep, but she was a light sleeper anyway, and I would sleep with her in the living room because I was afraid to sleep alone. I walk in and see a figure that looks like my father under the bedsheets. I lay on the bed and hug it. It breathes up and down and takes my hand and puts it around himself. I wake up the next morning. The bed was made up, and my nanny walks in and says excitedly, "You slept alone." Later during the day, my dad comes back. He was apparently at a friend's house, blackout drunk. What was hugging me that night? Last night I woke up in the middle of the night. That's fairly unusual for me, but I assumed I had to go to the bathroom. When I rolled over, I noticed a shadowy figure sitting at the foot of my bed. Then it sort of leaned over me and was putting pressure on the right side of my hip with one of its arms. Then, with its other arm, it sort of made this sweeping gesture that was going towards the left side of my face. As soon as I opened my mouth to scream bloody murder, it disappeared and the pressure faded. However, the place where it was touching my hip had sort of pins and needles feeling, like a limb falling asleep for a while. Needless to say, it freaked the hell out of me. I mentioned it to my roommate if anything weird had happened, and she hadn't noticed, and said that something fell down by her bed. I haven't told her the full story because I don't want her to think I'm crazy. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? I'm genuinely curious. One night when I was around 12, I was lying in bed with the door to my room open, and a little light coming in from the hallway from somewhere else in the house. I was trying to sleep. I opened my eyes for a second and vividly saw a strange man walking into my room. There were no sounds of his footsteps. To this day, I still remember his description. Tall, thin, light skin and black hair, was wearing a worn grey tank top with mechanical grease stains and blue jeans. He walked directly towards me and faded into invisibility as he approached me. I sat up and looked at where he had been standing. Suddenly he reappeared at my doorway and walked towards me again, but this time more faded away and translucent. He disappeared again and it happened a third time, and after 3 times I didn't see him. Perhaps it was a demon or just my imagination, but I just assumed it was a demon and therefore didn't worry about it after the initial shock. If it's an evil spirit, all it wants to do is make you feel afraid, so I did the opposite of that and had the courage to look the man in the eye instead. Perhaps that's why I've never had a similar experience since. Lately, I've been seeing this entity. It's mostly when I'm chilling late at night that I see it, and for some reason it doesn't scare me. Like usually I'm terrified of things like this to the point of shaking, but right now I only feel mild discomfort. So when she moves, it's like her last frame in time is slightly delayed or overlaid over the current, almost like the dream effect filter. And it looks like her entire body has been extremely posterized and turned black and white. The 2 times I've seen her was when I was in bed and flipped over to see her perched like a spider on the wall in the corner of my room, head basically breaking and to stare directly at me. She quickly crawled up backwards while maintaining eye contact, then faded away. The second time I was on my phone when I caught a glimpse behind it of the same exact face from last time, unchanged. I'd really like some advice if anyone has it. A lot of creepy things seem to happen in the same apartment. I don't remember when the thing happened, but for a little bit of an image, when you enter the apartment you go through into the living room. There, splitting to the right, is the kitchen. When you go into the kitchen there's a bathroom, not too far off from the left. If you keep going there's a playroom at the end of the kitchen. If you go back to the living room and go forward a few steps, it takes you right to where you would wind up in me and my sister's room. If you take a left, you would be in my mum's room. And in my room we had one window that faced the street and always had a light shining into it. My bed was to the right of the window, and I usually slept at the end of the bed, the end that was facing the window. One night after tossing and turning a lot, I felt the urge to look out my window. When I looked outside, I saw something that I'll never forget. There was a man who looked to be about 20 or 30, staring in. His face was the color of an apple, and was staring with such intensity that it scared me. But what made this very creepy was the fact that we were on the 2nd floor, so that was impossible unless he used a ladder. So, the next one also takes place in my apartment. Me and my sister were really close and would always hang out, but I was always scared of her. She acted really weird when we lived in the apartment. Once my mum found my sister in the middle of the night, crying in a corner, rocking back and forth. My mum nudged her, but the crying stopped, and my sister turned her head and stared at my mum. As you can imagine, It creeped her out thoroughly. One night, me and my family had a sleepover in the living room. I woke up, looked at my sister who was bolt upright, and when I looked at her face, it had this long, wide, toothy grin and was just staring at me. She kept getting closer and closer to me until she just lied down as if nothing happened. This really scared me, and I ended up snuggling closer to my mum that night. One time I made my sister mad somehow, and she tried to attack me with a butter knife. This reminded me of the movie Halloween, and it scared me so bad that when she struck it to me, it left a dent in my back. She isn't crazy and is better now. This was just one of the many instances where my sister almost made me crap my pants. This is the last story. This was in a different house. When you enter this house, there is a living room on your left and an office on your right. When you go further down the hall, my parents' room is on the right and the dining room on the left. If you go to the end of the hall, you see the bathroom, and on your right is my room. If you go into the dining room and move forward some more, you reach the kitchen, and so on and so forth. My room was pretty big and had pretty blue curtains. I had a dresser situated right next to my door and one next to my bathroom door. One night I woke up and was really hot. I decided to go lie down on the couch where it was cool. I saw something on the carpet by the front door. It was a big black lump. That's all I can really describe this thing as. I wanted to see what it was, so I went into my room to get my blanket, and when I came back it was gone. I knew it couldn't have been my cat, because this blob was huge, and my cat was outside it. I was so scared, I didn't even hesitate. I decided to sleep in my parents' room. When I talked about it with my birth mum, she asked me if a pet cat had died recently, and I said yes. It was actually an emotional death because it was my first. She said it could have been him. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense, because the dog that had died there, who I loved dearly, was also black, and it could have been him. I like to believe that it was my dog watching out for me. Years ago when I was 7, I woke up in the middle of the night and walked to the bathroom of my room. When I opened the door to the bathroom, there was a creature. It looked like a bluish ghost, but I could see it. It was wearing an army vest and had a skeleton as well. I screamed, closed the door, and burrowed under my bed covers until I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, I thought it was a dream, but just to be safe, I didn't go into the bathroom for most of the day. And the weird thing is, I have a bad memory. I only remember things when they make an impression on me. And even then, my dreams aren't that realistic. I wonder what it could have been. I was dreaming when suddenly I felt a very distinct presence at the entrance of my room, which woke me up. I ask him in my thoughts to leave. Suddenly the presence rushes over me, and I hear it quickly walking on the ceiling, heavy, very rapid squeaks, then on the wall where my headboard is located, and plunge into it. I then feel a strong pain in my right lung, which straightens me in bed. It differs from a rat noise, for example. I remember when in my country house a dormouse found itself in my room, and I heard a real body walking. Its 4 paws on the floor and its tail was lying around, and I hadn't felt horrified. It was just a little surprising. Here it was, instant dread, and a very different way of getting around. I heard a bed creaking in the distance, which could be what I took for a paranormal phenomenon, and I tried to reassure myself that it is. I tremble with every creak around the room. I'm not easily scared, and I have no longer had nightmares because I've learnt not to be afraid of what it is. I stayed with the light of my phone on for 20 minutes. I didn't even want to get out of bed, fearing it was under it. Finally I do, and was calm again. I'm just a little shocked. I genuinely don't know what to do. I appear to have drawn the attention of a young female spirit. Before I explain what happened, I need to give some backstory. I've been an empath as long as I can remember. And the more I have come to understand about empathetic energy, the more I have become aware of supernatural energies. Now my girlfriend is in tuned to these energies in a different way, being able to see spirits since childhood. Now I have been able to see spirits, but I generally just sense them. But my girlfriend and I have started to do yoga at the bookstore/dance studio where she works. I was aware that there were a couple of spirits there, and just did my usual to let them be, and wasn't expecting what happened. The 4 or 5 times we were doing yoga, we were about 15 minutes in when I saw what looked to be a 12-year-old girl in the bathroom giggling at me. She then disappeared when I looked a second time. After acknowledging it, I was informed that she started showing up after a bunch of children's books got donated to the store. I got a little weird about her watching me, and was wondering if she was watching me change my clothes when I was in the bathroom. If it wasn't weird enough, the next time we went to do yoga, I greeted her and the other spirit out of respect for being in their spot. Nothing unusual happened that time, but twice during the yoga session I felt an orb fly through my hand as if I was stretching my arms up high. It was as if she was going to give me a high five. The first time it was more circular and the second it was more oval. I hope that this is just a friendly game she's playing, because I really don't want a spirit attached to me. This started off when I was 10 years old. I and my friend were playing around with phone games. One of them was called Phantom Black. It was a ghost radar game that seems fake, but at one point when I realized that one of the spirits was just standing in a corner full of chairs, I soon asked my friend, "Why is there a ghost standing there?" "He's been there for 5 minutes. The table flipped, so we ran away, and he told his mum, but obviously no one believed us." 9 years later, I moved out to a new house and got new cats. Shortly after getting the cats, the day I let them sleep with me, things got weird. That night I started hearing boxes getting scratched. I thought it was one of the cats, but that did not stop me from opening my phone's flashlight and to see where my cats were asleep, and the scratching stopped. It happened twice, and the third time I was kinda scared because in horror movies and games, ghosts tend to show themselves after the third time. I got my phone's camera out and I looked around with it. I was watching videos, and there were glowing eyes. I guessed that my cats got tired of my movement and got up. A few days passed and my cat started doing these weird things, looking at nothing and playing with nothing for no reason. For the past while I've also been hearing crawling on the walls and random knocks at 3 a.m. And last night I swear I heard a whisper. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I'm Indian and Muslim. I was reading some old stuff I had written about a possible ghostly encounter back in 2016 when I was 19. It was mid to late November, and I heard it around 8 p.m.-ish. I was walking into the kitchen to grab a snack. I stopped, thinking I heard someone say my name, and I turned around and looked towards the living room, and saw some strangers sitting on my living room sofa. This person was wearing a white anarkali dress, which is a South Asian dress. It was definitely a woman because of the dress and the figure, as well as sitting with one leg over the other, and their elbow was on the leg that was over the other one. I never did get a look at its face though. I then looked away and I'm not sure I remember why I did, but when I turned back, no one was there. A few days later, I was in my front yard sweeping my walkway when I crouched down to get something I dropped to the ground, and I lifted my head, and I saw someone in front of me. It was a female figure, and this figure was wearing some pretty kick-ass white high heels and a white anarkali dress, and I immediately recognized it as the dress I'd seen a few days prior. I then stood up, but no one was there. What do you guys think? Am I hallucinating? Or am I being haunted? I searched up woman in a white dress, but it comes up with a story of a woman who passed in childbirth and other horrible deaths. I did my week research for a bit, and after it happened, and then I gave up. So, many articles discouraged the thought of seeing ghosts. I don't think it was an angel, because all the articles said that angels are a light source. I honestly don't know. What do you guys think? I live out in the sticks. and once in a while a really loud bang happens outside. It sounds like a heavy door slamming really hard. I'm not the only one who heard it, and nobody knows where it comes from or what it is. And now, for something completely different. When I was a kid, I used to hang at my buddy's place all the time. There was a story that my buddy's mom and her friend had seen something one night. It was a fairly new log house at the time. I liked it because they built it so you could look straight through the living room, kitchen, hallway, and out the back door. It was pretty cool. Anyway, my buddy's mum and her friend were hanging out there, and they found out they weren't alone. They were in the living room, and one of them happened to look down the hallway. Right by the back door, they see a dark figure with glowing white eyes standing there. They start screaming, and they jumped on the couch and began praying. Meanwhile, they see this thing start walking towards them, and that's all that story I remember. So after hearing that, I don't like being in the house alone. Creepy as hell, even in the day. So one night my buddy is off somewhere, and I'm just tired as hell and didn't want to go home. I'm there with his little brother and sister, and they're in the living room, and I shut off the light in the kitchen. They had a couch in there, so I lay down to get a little sleep. I'm drifting off, and I start getting this really bad feeling. I open my eyes, and there's this dark silhouette standing over me. It had this big bulbous head and just stood there. I'm a split second from bouncing up and running out their front door when I realize I'm looking at my forearm at first. Wow, you did it. You hit the end of the 100 Ghost Stories video. That is impressive. Even more impressive if you did it on the day it was uploaded. Kudos to you. So, let's talk about some stuff. I did promise a live stream for today. Well, that didn't happen. Why? Well, it's because my laptop is dead. I think. Not fully dead, but it's on its way out. While I was recording this video, it shut off, which I thought was weird. So I turned it back on, turned on the internet, turned on Premiere Pro, and then out of the blue, it turned off again while mid-recording. Specifically, it was the story about the couple in Venice when it turned off, which is story 80 for me. But you know, for you guys, I put it at the start because I quite like the story. As you can imagine, it really made me worried. So I looked it up. It happened again when I turned it on. And it turns out, I think the heat exchange in the machine might be, well, it's working, but I think a fan isn't working, basically. And I looked, and a fan isn't spinning anymore. So that's quite alarming. I mean, I've had the laptop for 5 years now. So yeah, I mean, things do break, especially when I work on it every single day. I guess it was bound to happen. So I'm a little bit upset. I don't know if it's worth trying to fix the heat exchange or just get a new machine. I'll think about it. There's not going to be an upload tomorrow, maybe not even the day after, because it takes most people, some time to listen to this amount of stories. And I really want you guys to listen to it. I really enjoyed making this, and I want you guys to appreciate it. So I'm going to give you guys time to listen. And if you've already finished it, well, you know, I do have like over 1,000 videos. I'm going to try and do the live stream tomorrow. Thankfully, my wife very kindly lent me her computer, which is newer and way better. So I'm going to have to try and get a new machine in the meantime, or send this to be fixed. I don't know, I'm going to do something. So I've got to sort this out anyway. Typical that it happened on Halloween, eh? Anyway, I hope you all have, or have had, a wonderful Halloween. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.